technology, and the human experience. How does simulation affect our perception of the world? The idea that reality can be an illusion is not new to as early as 400 BC. The philosopher Plato described the famous allegory of the cave. In his work The Republic, Plato imagines a group of people who have been living in a cave all their lives. They are chained to the walls and see only the shadows of objects passing behind them. These shadows are the only thing they know about the world. For them, shadows are the real reality. But one day, one of them breaks free and comes to the surface. He sees the real world, the bright sun, trees, flowers. He realizes that everything he used to believe in was just a reflection of the real world. Through this story, Plato wanted to show that our perception of the world can be limited, and what we consider real can be just a shadow of the true reality. This is very similar to modern ideas about simulation. Many ancient religions have also hinted at the idea that the world is not the true reality. Hinduism has the concept of Maya, or illusion. Maya is a veil that hides the true nature of existence. People live in a world of illusion, thinking that it is reality, when in fact it is only a temporary, deceptive form. Buddhism also says that the world we perceive is unstable and constantly changing. Therefore, it cannot be real. Christianity also has similar ideas. The concept of this world as a temporary place before the real, eternal life. These religious traditions offer a view of the world where what we see is not the ultimate reality. And this idea is very close to the modern theory of simulation that in the 17th century, the philosopher René Descartes made another important step towards the idea of simulation. In his work Meditations on First Philosophy, Descartes asks, "How do I know that this world is real? Can there be an evil demon that deceives my senses?" He suggested that everything we see, hear, and feel could be just a fiction created by some powerful being. Descartes, of course, was not talking about computer games. But the idea that everything around us could be fake was very close to the concept of simulation. His famous statement, "I think, therefore I exist," was his way of proving that while the world around him might be a sham, his own consciousness was real. When computers appeared in the 20th century, the idea of simulation was given new life. In the 1940s and 1950s, cybernetics, the science of systems, control, and communication in both machines and living organisms, emerged. People began to realize that it was possible to model complex processes. On computers, the idea emerged that if we could create models of the real world, then maybe one day we could create a model so detailed that the living things inside wouldn't know they were just part of the simulation. Science fiction writers have also picked up on this idea. In the novels of the 50s and 60s, stories about virtual worlds and altered realities began to appear. For example, Philip K. Dick's novel The Simulacra shows a society where reality is completely falsified by the authorities. In the 1970s and 1980s, the first video games were released. Starting with simple arcade games such as Pong or Space Invaders, technologies were developing rapidly. More and more complex simulations appeared. The first three-dimensional environments that role-playing games, RPGs, where a player could create a character and live in an alternative world. Strategies where you had to manage entire civilizations, games such as The Sims or SimCity, where users created entire virtual worlds, had a particularly big impact. People realized that they could create a small world with its own rules and inhabitants who acted within these rules, and a logical question arose. What if our universe is a similar simulation, just incredibly complex? In 1999, a movie was released that changed the course of conversations about simulation. The matrix. People live in a world that is actually a complex computer simulation. Their bodies are connected to machines, and their minds are deceived by virtual reality. The movie made many people think, is what we see real? How can you realize that you are in a simulation? Is it possible to wake up from such an illusion? The Matrix has become a cultural phenomenon and has cemented the idea of simulation in the mass consciousness. In 2003, the Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom published a work that became a key in the development of the topic of simulation. Are you living in a computer simulation? Bostrom proposed the so-called simulation argument. He argues that one of three statements must be true. Humanity died out before it could create simulations of reality. Humanity is not interested in creating simulations of its ancestors. We are almost certainly living in a simulation. In other words, if technology makes it possible to create simulations so realistic that the beings inside don't realize they are in a simulation, then we are probably already in one. Bostrom emphasized that this is not necessarily true, but from a mathematical point of view, it is very likely. Over time, stories began to emerge that people perceived as evidence of simulation, objects disappearing and reappearing, people telling the same dreams, déjà vu, the feeling that you have already experienced this moment. Some people perceive such phenomena as glitches in the matrix, small errors in the program code of reality. Of course, most scientists consider these to be psychological effects or accidents. But for many people, the idea of glitches looks like a disturbing hint. Reality may be artificial. Some modern physicists have also suggested that space and time may have a discrete structure, similar to pixels in a video game. Physicist John Archibald Wheeler promoted the concept of it from bit, the idea that all physical reality is based on information. There are also hypotheses that certain quantum phenomena can be explained through models of computation. The idea is that the universe can work like a colossal computer code. Today, simulation theory has become more than just a scientific hypothesis or fiction. It has turned into an entire philosophical movement. Some say it gives new meaning to our existence. Others believe that it can make life meaningless, and still others see it as another attempt to explain the mysteries of the universe. Regardless of whether we believe in simulation or not, one thing is important. The idea raises fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and ourselves. Arguments for simulation theory. The most famous argument in favor of simulation is the work of Nick Bostrom. His logic is as follows. If humanity doesn't self-destruct, it will evolve to the point where it can create very realistic simulations. If this happens, it will be easy to create such simulations in huge numbers, millions or billions of virtual worlds. In this case, the number of artificial minds will be much greater than the number of real minds. Consequently, the probability that we are real and not simulated is extremely low. To put it simply, if future civilizations are creating simulations of their ancestors, then statistically speaking, we are most likely already part of one of these simulations. It sounds strange, but mathematically it is extremely logical. Another strong argument in favor of the simulation theory is the development of modern technology. Just look around you. Realistic video games with open worlds, artificial intelligence that simulates conversation and even creativity, virtual reality, VR, where you can live in another world. Every year, technologies become more and more realistic. In a few decades or hundreds of years, we may well create a simulation so real that its inhabitants will not realize they are in a simulation. If we can imagine such a technology today, what can we say about civilizations that may be millions of years ahead of us? Supporters of the simulation hypothesis believe that technological progress has a certain logic. First, people invent simple tools. Then, machines, computers, artificial intelligence. The next logical step is to create realistic virtual worlds. Therefore, if a civilization survives long enough and does not self-destruct through war or environmental disaster, it will almost certainly reach a level of technology where creating simulations will become the norm. Proponents of the simulation theory often cite phenomena that are difficult to explain in terms of conventional physics. Déjà vu, the feeling that you have already experienced a certain moment. Synchronicity, when events seem to miraculously coincide. Premonition, knowledge of future events without an obvious explanation. Some people believe that these are glitches or updates in the code of reality, like in a game where you sometimes notice lags or instability. Of course, traditional science has its own explanations for these phenomena, but simulation theory offers a different, sometimes even more intuitive explanation. Another interesting argument is that the fundamental constants in physics seem to be perfectly tuned for the existence of life. For example, the force of gravity, the charge of an electron, the speed of light. That if these values were even slightly different, life in our universe would be impossible. Someone said, it's like setting up a game before you start it. Perhaps our universe was tuned artificially to create a stable environment for the development of life. There is a strange phenomenon in quantum mechanics. Particles behave differently when they are observed, in the famous two-slit experiment. Particles of light change their behavior depending on whether we are observing them. This is very similar to the principle of optimization in computer games. Objects appear only when the player is looking at them. Proponents of the simulation hypothesis say that this may be a clue. Reality is created dynamically when there is a need. Today, we are creating the first prototypes of artificial intelligence. Programs can write texts, draw pictures, and generate music. Imagine what will happen in 100 or 1,000 years. We will be able to create conscious beings in virtual space. They will have their own thoughts, feelings, and desires. But for them, their virtual world will be the only reality. If we ourselves will soon be able to create consciousness in a simulation, then it is possible that we ourselves are the same creatures. Some physical theories suggest the existence of a multiverse, an infinite number of universes with different laws of physics. That if this is true, then the creation of artificial realities will be just another type of multiple worlds. In such a system, it is very easy to imagine that most universes are simulations created by intelligent beings. Another unexpected argument: economic efficiency. Creating a real planet costs billions and takes millions of years. Creating a virtual planet is a matter of computer power resources. In the distant future, it will be more profitable for civilizations to simulate virtual worlds for research, entertainment, or education than to create something real. Economically, it makes sense. Finally, the psychological aspect is worth mentioning. People have always sought to create alternative worlds, fairy tales, and myths. Theater performances, movies, and virtual games. It is our natural need to create parallel realities. It is therefore quite logical to assume that developed civilizations will also want to create simulations. And a logical question arose: what if our universe is a similar simulation, just incredibly complex? In 1999, a movie was released that changed the course of conversations about simulation. The Matrix. In The Matrix, people live in a world that is actually a complex computer simulation. Their bodies are connected to machines, and their minds are deceived by virtual reality. The movie made many people think, is what we see real? How can you realize that you are in a simulation? Is it possible to wake up from such an illusion? The Matrix has become a cultural phenomenon and has cemented the idea of simulation in the mass consciousness. In 2003, the Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom published a work that became a key in the development of the topic of simulation. Are you living in a computer simulation? Bostrom proposed the so-called simulation argument. He argues that one of three statements must be true. Humanity died out before it could create simulations of reality. Humanity is not interested in creating simulations of its ancestors. We are almost certainly living in a simulation. In other words, if technology makes it possible to create simulations so realistic that the beings inside don't realize they are in a simulation, then we are probably already in one. Bostrom emphasized that this is not necessarily true, but from a mathematical point of view, it is very likely. Over time, stories began to emerge that people perceived as evidence of simulation, objects disappearing and reappearing, people telling the same dreams, déjà vu, the feeling that you have already experienced this moment. Some people perceive such phenomena as glitches in the matrix, small errors in the program code of reality. Of course, most scientists consider these to be psychological effects or accidents. But for many people, the idea of glitches looks like a disturbing hint. Reality may be artificial. Some modern physicists have also suggested that space and time may have a discrete structure, similar to pixels in a video game. Physicist John Archibald Wheeler promoted the concept of it from bit, the idea that all physical reality is based on information. There are also hypotheses that certain quantum phenomena can be explained through models of computation. The idea is that the universe can work like a colossal computer code. Today, simulation theory has become more than just a scientific hypothesis or fiction. It has turned into an entire philosophical movement. Some say it gives new meaning to our existence. Others believe that it can make life meaningless, and still others see it as another attempt to explain the mysteries of the universe. Regardless of whether we believe in simulation or not, one thing is important. The idea raises fundamental questions about the nature of reality, consciousness, and ourselves. Arguments against simulation theory. One of the main criticisms of simulation theory is that creating a fully simulated universe requires enormous resources. Imagine billions of galaxies, trillions of stars, and an infinite number of interactions between particles at the quantum level. Even the most advanced computers we can imagine are unlikely to be able to process and store all this information in real time. The counterargument of supporters: you can optimize, simulate only what is observed. But even this does not solve the problem completely. Even simulating the brain of one person is a colossal task. Now imagine simulating all living things and non-living processes. There is a limit to the technological power of even the most advanced civilizations. Another serious argument: we do not know how to create real consciousness. Artificial intelligence can simulate conversation, creativity, logic, but the feeling of I exist, subjective experience, this is a completely different level. How to generate emotions, how to create real suffering or joy. Is it possible to simulate it at all? So far, we do not even understand the nature of consciousness, so the assumption that some civilization can create simulated beings with real consciousness is just a hypothesis without confirmation. Let's imagine that we really live in a simulation. Now, think, can our simulators also be in a simulation? And their creators in their simulation? And so on without end. This creates the problem of infinite regression. Where is the real reality? Is there even a first civilization creator? This endless structure seems illogical and contradicts the basic principles of philosophy. An explanation should be clear and not introduce more questions than answers. Many critics believe that simulation theory is attractive from a psychological point of view because it allows us to remove responsibility from ourselves, believe that life is just a game, avoid the fear of death. That it is easier to think that we are characters in a game than to accept the uncertainty and cruelty of the real world. Therefore, some psychologists consider simulation theory a modern kind of religion. It makes sense even if there is no evidence. The most obvious argument: there is no evidence of simulation that we have not found. Glitch in the matrix. Bugs in the laws of physics that no hints of the existence of an external programmer. The entire theory is based on logical assumptions and philosophical reflections, but has no experimental confirmation. Science requires evidence. Without evidence, it remains a hypothesis, not a fact. Even assuming that simulation technology exists, the question remains: why would someone simulate our universe? Possible answers: a scientific experiment, entertainment, imitation of the history of their ancestors. But all these assumptions are just fantasies. There is no guarantee that advanced civilizations will be interested in such experiments at all. Perhaps they will be much more interested in studying the cosmos without simulations or creating something completely different. If our reality is a simulation, then do we have rights? Does our suffering or joy matter? Are we not just data in someone else's program? If not, this creates a serious ethical problem. Simulated sentient beings become victims of the indifference or even cruelty of their creators. This again raises the question: would a moral civilization want to create such simulations at all? Proponents of simulation theory often assume that civilizations will inevitably survive. They will inevitably want to create simulations. Technology will always develop linearly. But history shows development is not always linear. Civilizations can destroy themselves. Technologies can stagnate or cause catastrophes. The main assumption of the theory may simply be wrong. If our world is a simulation, then why is it so vast and incredibly complex? Is most of the universe empty and uninhabited? Are our lives often filled with suffering, boredom, and meaninglessness? This is not a very effective or interesting game world. It is more logical to assume that the real world is chaotic and indifferent, rather than designed with a specific purpose. Finally, it is worth mentioning that there is a contradiction in the simulation hypothesis itself. If we are simulated, then who is observing our world? If no one is observing, then why the simulation? And if there is an observer, can we not detect his presence? But we see no signs of external interference. This calls into question the very necessity of the simulation. Philosophical foundations of reality. Plato, Descartes, Berkeley. Before delving into the concept of simulation, it is important to realize the idea that our reality may be illusory is not new. It originated in the minds of philosophers thousands of years ago. How can we be sure that reality is real? Are our senses deceiving us? Is there no real world outside our perception? Three great thinkers, Plato, René Descartes, and George Berkeley, have tried to answer these questions in their own ways. Their ideas have laid the foundation for modern hypotheses, including simulation theory. Plato, 427 to 347 BC, is one of the greatest philosophers of antiquity. One of his most famous works, The Allegory of the Cave, directly addresses the theme of the illusion of reality. Imagine people spend their entire lives in a cave, tied up so that they can only see the wall that a fire burns behind them, and other people walk between them and the fire, carrying objects. These objects cast shadows on the wall in front of the prisoners. For the prisoners, only shadows are reality. They have never seen real objects and do not know about fire or the world outside. Plato's main idea. Our world of sensory perception is only a pale shadow of true reality in the context of simulation theory. This means we perceive only shadows of the real world. Perhaps there is a deeper, unattainable truth. Interesting. The scene in The Matrix, where Morpheus shows Neo the real world, is a direct allusion to Plato's allegory of the cave. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, is the father of modern philosophy. He pioneered radical skepticism. Doubt everything you can. Descartes wondered, can I trust my senses? Is it possible that everything I perceive is an illusion? Is there an evil demon that is deceiving my senses? Even the most elementary things, heat, hardness, colors, can be false. But the one thing he could not doubt was, if I doubt, therefore, I am. This was formulated in the famous phrase, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. What does this mean for simulation theory? Maybe the world is a simulation. Maybe my sensations are false. But my thinking, conscious activity is real. Descartes laid the foundation for the fact that even in a simulation there will be a certain point of reality. Consciousness. George Berkeley, 1685 to 1753, is one of the most famous idealists. His main idea, to exist is to be perceived. According to Berkeley, matter does not exist by itself. All that exists is either our perceptions or the mind that creates these perceptions. That if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears it, it does not fall. But who then supports the existence of the world when we cannot see it? Berkeley answers, God perceives everything constantly. He is the guarantor of the existence of reality. Connection with simulation. In the modern interpretation of Berkeley, instead of God, one can imagine a computer or program that supports the existence of the world independently of observers. Plato, the real world exists, but we see only its shadows. People are in a cave of illusions. Freedom is the way out of the cave to true knowledge. Descartes, we can doubt everything except our thinking. You can only believe in your own consciousness, searching for undeniable truth through doubt. Berkeley, matter does not exist without perception. Reality is a flow of ideas and sensations. How does this relate to the theory of simulation? Plato, we are in a virtual cave. We perceive only projections. Descartes, even in a simulation, our thinking is real. Berkeley, reality exists as long as it is seen or calculated by someone higher. Many modern scientists who talk about simulation theory actually develop the ideas of Plato, Descartes, and Berkeley. Examples: ideas about the pixel universe, Plato; arguments about the uncertainty of reality in quantum physics, Descartes; theories about the universe as an informational construct, Berkeley. Interestingly, physicist Nick Bostrom, who formulated the most famous version of the simulation argument, actually stands on the shoulders of these philosophical giants because they touch on fundamental questions. Can we trust our senses? What is true reality? How to check what exists beyond us? And if there is no clear answer to these questions, even after thousands of years, then simulation theory remains one of the possible versions of our reality. Reality and consciousness. What can we possibly know? We think we know many things, but is this really so? Can we be sure of our own memories, feelings, experiences? In the real or virtual world, the question of what knowledge is becomes even more acute. That if we live in a simulation, then all our knowledge may be a fake, built-in memory, sewn-in sensations, constructed memories. In classical philosophy, there are three main ways to gain knowledge: senses, empiricism, we trust what we see; hear, feel. Supporters: John Locke, David Hume. Problem: our senses can be deceived. Example: we see a mirage in the desert and think it is water. Reason, rationalism, knowledge. Comes from logical thinking. Supporters: Descartes, Leibniz. Problem: our minds can make false assumptions. Example: if our basic axiom is false, all logical deduction will be false. Intuition: direct understanding of truth without logical proof. Proponents: Henri Bergson, William James. Problem: intuition is often subjective and context-dependent. In a simulation, all three paths can be programmed. Philosophical experiment: imagine your brain being removed from your body and connected to a supercomputer that creates a realistic simulation. You experience the world as you always do. You touch objects, you hear sounds, you communicate with people, but in reality, you have no body. There is no world around you. There are only electrical impulses that simulate reality. Question: how do you distinguish reality from simulation if your sensations are equally real in both cases? Our brain is not a perfect receiver of reality. It is an active interpreter of signals. Examples of illusions: optical illusions. Lines appear curved, although they are straight. Memory errors, false memories. The Mandela effect, collective distortion of memory. Interesting. If we are so easily deceived in the real world, can we even recognize a simulation? Even if there is a real world, we do not perceive it directly. Example: the eye sees electromagnetic waves. The brain draws colors, shadows, depth. So, what we see is not the real world. This is the brain's interpretation. In a simulation, this process can be further controlled by adjusting the interpretations we perceive as true. Epistemology is the philosophy of knowledge. Modern philosophers recognize that true knowledge is a complex construct, that we are constantly working with assumptions, not absolute truths. Conditions for true knowledge: belief in the truth of a statement, the factual truth of a statement, the presence of justified reason to believe it to be true. But in a simulation world, we can have faith and reason, and the fact itself will be false. In the 21st century, even in the real world, the concept of truth has become blurred. Fake news, media manipulation, propaganda. People believe things that do not correspond to reality. The post-truth world resembles a simulation, where facts are replaced by emotions and beliefs. This creates the illusion of reality without a real basis. If we are in a simulation, then what is consciousness? There are three options. Real consciousness: our mind exists outside the simulation and only plays in it. Artificial consciousness: we are created by agents of a simulation program. Hybrid: the basic consciousness is modified by the rules of the simulation. Question: if we are simulated, do we have free will? In the real or simulated world, the only thing we know for sure is we cannot be sure of anything. That we can doubt reality, that we can doubt perception, that we can doubt ourselves. But, paradoxically, this uncertainty is the main sign that consciousness exists. Therefore, even in simulation, our question, what is reality, remains the most important question of existence. Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis: three possible options for the development of civilization. Nick Bostrom is a Swedish philosopher who has become one of the most famous proponents of simulation theory. In 2003, he published his article, "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?", where he put forward one of the most famous theories about the possibility that we could be living in a simulation created by a more advanced civilization. Bostrom used a statistical approach to prove that the simulation theory is very likely, even if we cannot directly confirm it. Bostrom formulated three main hypotheses that, in his opinion, determine the probability that we are living in a simulation. Point 1. The first hypothesis: the civilization will disappear before it reaches a level capable of creating simulations of conscious beings. In this case, future civilizations will not be able to reach the technological level to create such complex simulations, so we cannot live in a simulation, since it simply will not be created. Point 2. The second hypothesis: civilization will reach this level of development, but will not be interested in creating simulations of conscious beings. Perhaps future civilizations will reach a level where they can create simulations, but they will not want to do so due to moral or ethical constraints. Point 3. The third hypothesis: we are probably living in a simulation that if civilization reaches the technological level to create simulations of conscious beings, and it is interested in creating them, then the number of simulated realities will exceed the number of real ones, and the probability that we live in a simulation will increase significantly. Bostrom not only formulated these three options, but also substantiated them in detail mathematically and statistically. Probability of simulation: if we assume that technology in the future will reach a level where it is possible to create simulations that differ from reality, then we can calculate the probability that we are living in a simulation. Since there can be many more simulated realities than real realities, the probability that we are living in a simulation becomes very high. Technical capabilities: with the help of powerful computer networks and artificial intelligence, a civilization can create a simulation so complex that it will be indistinguishable from the real world. Already today, we create simulations that are very similar to reality. Video, games, virtual worlds, even simulators for training. Interesting. Think about how we can create virtual realities today, and what possibilities open up with the development of technology in the future. Simulation theory arouses both admiration and criticism. The supporters Elon Musk and other scientists actively support the idea of simulation, pointing to the rapid development of virtual reality technologies. Musk, in particular, expressed the opinion that the probability that we are not living in a simulation is very small, since the technologies for creating simulations are almost ready. Critics: some scientists believe that the theory of simulation is too speculative and there is not enough evidence to confirm it. Point 1. Of the main criticisms is that it is impossible to prove or disprove the hypothesis using modern scientific methods. What does philosophy think? Many philosophers criticize the hypothesis, pointing to problems with its definition and verification. For example, philosophers often ask the question, how can we be sure that there is at least some real reality outside the simulation? Simulation theory, even if it is not reliable, provides very important metaphors and questions. Testing the limits of our understanding of reality: simulation theory forces us to think about our concepts of reality and consciousness. It pushes us to ask questions about what true reality is and whether we are even capable of knowing it. Technology and humanity: regardless of whether we are in a simulation or not, technology is changing our understanding of reality. Virtual worlds, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence are the realities that are coming. Reality creating technologies are becoming an integral part of our lives, and we must think about the consequences of their development. Nick Bostrom's hypothesis, no matter how we perceive it, opens up a huge field for reflection. That we are faced with three possible scenarios. Civilizations are unable to create simulations or will disappear before that. Civilizations can create simulations, but they have no interest in using them to create conscious beings. That we live in a simulation, and it's only a matter of time before it becomes obvious if we really are living in a simulation It changes our perspective on everything from our freedom to the essence of existence. But even if it's not, the hypothesis itself forces us to rethink what we know about reality. Simulation technologies, from virtual worlds to neural networks. Modern technology has already begun to blur the line between the real world and virtual simulations. From simple video games to complex virtual worlds, from neural networks to artificial intelligence, the technologies we create are becoming increasingly complex, and each of them brings us closer to the possibility of creating realities that will be almost indistinguishable from our OWN.in this section. We will look at how today's technologies allow us to create complex simulations that can change our understanding of the world and reality. Virtual reality, VR, is the most striking example of how technology can create alternative realities. How does virtual reality work? Interfaces. VR uses headsets, gloves, special motion tracking platforms to immerse a person in a synthetic environment. Visual effects. 3D images that respond to changes in viewing angle and head movements allow you to create the illusion of being in another world. Sensory integration. Virtual reality also uses haptic feedback to allow users to feel textures, temperatures, and forces as they interact with the virtual environment. Impact on consciousness. Virtual worlds can affect human consciousness. We can already create simulations that are indistinguishable from the real world, and this opens up new horizons for manipulating perception. For example, in virtual reality, it is possible to make a person unaware that they are in a simulation. They can believe that they are in the real world. Importance for simulation theory. If we are already creating such realistic simulations, it is conceivable that in the future technology could create simulations that are so complex that even the simulated beings themselves will not be able to distinguish them from reality. Neural networks. What are they? Neural networks are algorithms that mimic the structure of the human brain. Using multi-layered models to process large amounts of data, they are capable of performing complex tasks such as pattern recognition, prediction, natural language processing, and even generating images, text, and music. One of the most interesting applications is the generation of content that is indistinguishable from what we can perceive as real. Artificial intelligence and the simulation of consciousness. Artificial intelligence, in particular deep learning, makes it possible to create artificial consciousnesses, although very limited compared to human ones. For example, there are already neural networks that can write works of art, generate music, and create virtual characters that seem almost real. This raises the question: if AI is capable of creating realistic simulations of people and their behavior, can there be such a technology that will make us consider the simulation as the real world? Modern virtual worlds, such as video games or online towns, for example, Second Life, give us new opportunities to interact with reality. Players can create their own virtual characters that have their own behavior and even interact with other players through their characters. Virtual worlds already allow us to experiment with different forms of existence, which is impossible in the real world. This is the opportunity to try out different roles, experiences, and social interactions that are part of large simulations. The role of such worlds in the development of simulation. If today, it is already possible to create virtual worlds in which people can live, interact, and develop, then, probably, in the future, civilization will create entire simulated worlds where not just characters, but conscious beings will live. And this will not be limited to games or entertainment. Such worlds can become full-fledged social systems that to create realistic simulations requires enormous computing power, but today's supercomputers are already capable of reaching new heights in simulations. from climate models to models of human behavior. With the development of quantum computers, a new era in computing will appear, which will allow the creation of simulations of even higher complexity. Simulations of the future. Scientists are already working on the creation of quantum simulations, where they will model not only matter, but also consciousness, emotions, even complex social phenomena. This poses another important question. When simulations reach such a level of development that it becomes impossible to distinguish them from reality, will we be able to distinguish simulated consciousness from real? Today's technologies already allow the creation of realistic virtual worlds and artificial intelligence that can imitate human consciousness. With the development of quantum computing and neural networks, we are approaching the stage where the creation of simulations that are indistinguishable from reality will become possible. If we are already creating such simulations, why not assume that we ourselves could be part of such a simulation created by a more advanced civilization? Or, at least, we could live in a world that is one of many possible versions of reality? The ethics of simulations. Does a civilization have the right to create artificial worlds? When it comes to simulation technologies, we often wonder not only about the technical possibilities, but also about their ethical implications. If a civilization is capable of creating virtual worlds where every being can have consciousness, does it have the right to do so? Can these worlds have moral meaning? In this section, we will consider the ethical questions surrounding the possibility of creating simulated realities and why we should take such questions seriously in the future. Consciousness in simulations. If in the future civilization is able to create simulations where beings are indistinguishable from real ones, this raises the question, can we create consciousness in an artificial environment? Moral questions. If simulated beings have consciousness, can we afford to create them by manipulating their fate? Is it morally justified if these beings can experience pain, suffering, or emotions? The ethics of creating life. Creating life is one of the most difficult moral dilemmas. If we can create conscious beings in simulations, can we exploit them if they are unable to influence their own existence? Technological capabilities of creating consciousness. Imagine that we create a virtual world in which every character is conscious and experiences events as a person does in the real world. Do we have the moral right to do this, even if it helps us for scientific or economic purposes? If simulated beings are conscious, the question arises whether they have any rights. Rights to existence. Do these beings have the right to exist? Do we have the right to terminate their existence at will? This is similar to the questions that arise when creating artificial life forms, such as robotic beings or AI. Morality of simulated beings. If virtual beings can suffer, do we have a moral responsibility to them? Should we prohibit the creation of simulations in which these beings may be forced to suffer? The right to freedom. As in the real world, we can give simulated beings freedom of choice. If they can consciously choose their actions, do they have the right to self-determination? This raises the question of whether we should give simulated beings the ability to change their fate. The creation of simulated realities can be used as a tool for scientific experiments, education, and the development of civilizations. However, such use can have both positive and negative consequences. Social experiments. The creation of simulations to study social processes, political systems, or psychological phenomena is one application that can provide new opportunities for science. However, the question here is whether such experiments can be safely conducted without moral violations. Potential risks. Reality manipulation. The creation of simulations for social or economic experiments can be used to manipulate people in the real world. If we create simulated worlds where virtual beings experience difficult situations, Can we learn from their experiences without harming their existence? Moral corruption. The question arises whether the creation and exploitation of simulated worlds can lead to moral degradation. If we become accustomed to being able to control conscious beings with impunity, this may affect our attitude towards the real world. The theory of simulated people, philosophers who support the idea of simulations ask, do simulated beings have a moral status similar to real people? Moral levels. If simulated beings are capable of self-awareness, feeling pain, joy, and other emotions, can they be considered full beings? Should the same ethical principles apply to them as to humans? Global ethics. Given the rapid development of technology, we must be prepared for the fact that in the future the creation of conscious simulations will become a reality. Is it necessary to develop ethical norms for such realities now in order to prevent moral violations in the future? If we create simulated worlds with beings who can feel, experience, and consciously exist, then the question of ethics will become extremely important. We must be prepared to approach the use of such technologies responsibly and carefully consider the moral boundaries that we set. The creation of artificial consciousness raises the question not only of technological progress, but also of whether it is morally acceptable. It is important to think now about the rules that will help us manage the development of such technologies without harming ethics and humanity. That we must remember that technologies created by people can change not only our ideas about reality, but also the principles on which we base our relationship to the world and other living beings, even if they are simulated. Simulation in culture and art. How do we imagine artificial realities? The concept of simulation is an important theme in culture and art, particularly in film, literature, and video games. The idea that we may live in a simulated reality, or that the reality we perceive may not be entirely real, is reflected in many works of art, from The Matrix to Vulcan. This question has been raised repeatedly, questioning what is real and what is not. In this section, we will examine how simulation has been embodied in culture and art, and what lessons can be drawn from these works for our modern understanding of reality. The Matrix, a new era in cultural representation. One of the most famous films that raises the issue of simulation is the Wachowski brothers' The Matrix. The film tells the story of a world in which most people live in an artificially created reality, and only a select few know about it. Philosophical issues. The film raises many philosophical themes, including Plato's ideas about how people can be virtually deceived about the nature of reality in his The Cave. The Matrix develops these ideas, leaving viewers with questions about what reality is and whether we can know it. Technology and power. The Matrix is about artificial intelligence, controlling people through simulation. This is not only a technical issue, but also an ethical one, as it raises the question of who has the right to manipulate consciousness. Other films that address simulation. The Truman Show. While this film does not address technology per se, it does show the life of a person who exists in a simulation without even knowing it. This raises important questions about free will, manipulation, and the possibility of control. The Man Who Fell to Earth, a film that explores the concepts of alien civilizations and how simulated realities can be created or manipulated to achieve certain goals. Philosophical foundations. Plato and his caves. Plato, in his work The Republic, describes a cave where people sit, tied to the walls, and can only see shadows of real objects. This image is a classic example of how people can be deceived by their reality. This metaphor, applied to the modern concept of simulations, shows how we can be limited by our perceptions and not realize that reality can be completely different. Modern authors and the concept of simulations Philip K. Dick. His works, including Did Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?, on which the film Blade Runner is based, explore questions of artificial intelligence, reality, and simulation. William Gibson, author of cyberpunk novels such as Neuromancer. He explores themes of virtual worlds where consciousness exists within technological simulations rather than physical realities. Video games as a new format for simulations. Video games have become one of the biggest cultural phenomena, allowing players to immerse themselves in alternate realities. Many games develop the theme of simulation as a central element of the plot. The Sims. This is one of the most famous games in which the player creates and manages the lives of virtual characters, building their homes, careers, and relationships. While the gameplay does not necessarily question reality, it shows how realities can be manipulated within virtual worlds that SimCity. Players in this city-building simulator also create entire societies and systems. This suggests another possibility: the creation of large simulated worlds that are both socially and naturally interconnected. Grand Theft Auto. The open-ended environment of this game allows players to interact with a simulated world where they can assume different social roles. This creates a sense of freedom within the virtual reality that encourages players to think about reality and its simulation. Virtual worlds. The role of online games and metaverses. Second Life and Minecraft. These games allow players to create and interact with large, fully fledged virtual worlds where players have the freedom to act and modify their environment. This inspires thinking about how simulated realities can be created and maintained that have their own internal logic and ecosystem. The theme of simulation has become a central theme in modern culture. From philosophical treatises to popular films and video games, the question of what reality is and whether we can create it will always be relevant. Art as a harbinger. Art anticipates future technologies and ideas, and simulation as a concept has become not just a theme for films, but an important element in our perception of reality. It helps us understand not only technological possibilities, but also ethical, philosophical, and social implications. Technological development. As technology continues to develop, we are getting closer to creating realistic simulations. Culture and art are already actively reflecting on these questions, which opens up new possibilities for understanding and perceiving the world. Simulation as a way of knowing reality. Is it possible to know the true nature of the world through technology? If we live in a simulated reality, can we use technology and scientific methods to learn about the true nature of the world? This question brings us back to the fundamental philosophical and scientific dilemmas surrounding the concept of simulation. How can technology help us explore or even uncover the nature of reality if everything around us may be just an illusion? In this section, we will focus on how technology can influence our perception of the world and whether we can learn about the true reality through it. Technologies for exploring the world. Simulations and technology can be powerful tools for learning about the world. They allow us to model processes that are difficult or impossible to study in real life. Virtual laboratories. Instead of conducting research in the real world, where there may be limitations or dangers, we can create virtual models where we can simulate various situations and phenomena. For example, studying the climate, the development of ecosystems, or even social structures. Virtual experiments. Modern technologies such as virtual reality, VR, and augmented reality, AR, allow us to deepen our understanding of the world by creating virtual models that can reflect physical, biological, or even psychological processes as accurately as possible. Simulation as a reflection of reality. One of the main aspects of simulation is its ability to reflect reality. If a simulation achieves high accuracy in transmitting physical laws and social processes, can we perceive it as an alternative reality? Technologies such as artificial intelligence help create virtual worlds that imitate real processes, from weather to human interaction. This opens up new horizons for exploring the world, not limited only to physical capabilities. Can simulations be used to model consciousness and learn about its nature? This is one of the main questions facing science and technology engaged in the study of human consciousness. Modeling neural processes. One area where simulation can help is neurobiology. Scientists can create models of neural processes in the brain to understand how consciousness, perception, and intelligence work. Artificial consciousness. Creating artificial consciousness is another important aspect. Can we create an artificially developed consciousness, and will it be similar to human consciousness? If so, this could open new ways to understand the phenomenon of consciousness itself. Philosophy of consciousness. In the context of simulations, philosophers have long asked the question of what consciousness is. If we create an artificial consciousness in a simulated environment, will we be able to know its nature? This question pushes the limits of our understanding of what is real and what is just a reflection. New perspectives on physics. Simulations can help not only in the study of biology or psychology, but also in physics. Using sophisticated computer models, we can explore the laws of nature in new ways. Simulation of physical processes. For example, theories related to black holes, quantum phenomena, or cosmology can be explored through simulations that allow us to understand complex processes that cannot be reproduced in reality. Virtual worlds as laboratories. Creating virtual worlds allows us to study how the laws of physics work and whether other versions of reality are possible where these laws change. Technology and the changing perception of reality. With the development of technology, our perception of reality is constantly changing. Modern tools such as VR, AR, neural interfaces allow us to interact with reality differently than we are used to. Deep perception of reality. Technology changes our possibilities for cognition. If we can observe and interact with reality using technology, can we consider this real cognition, or is it just a modification of our experience? Reality as a reflection of technology. The emergence of new technologies can lead us to see our physical reality as part of a vast simulation that we can create and modify with the help of new tools. Simulation can be both a way of learning about the nature of reality and a reflection of it. Technology gives us new tools to explore the world, and this changes our perception of what is real. Learning through technology. Through simulations, we can expand our knowledge by creating new models of the world, allowing us to deepen our understanding of physical, biological, and social processes. Philosophical aspect. However, this also raises the question of what is true reality. If we can create realities that are practically indistinguishable from the real one, can we ever know the true reality? Ultimately, technology not only changes our understanding of the world, but also gives us new opportunities to search for truth through the creation, manipulation, and modeling of realities. History of the idea of simulation. In a world where technology is constantly evolving, our perception of reality is changing. What is real in a world that is increasingly filled with virtual and digital simulations? Technologies such as artificial intelligence, virtual reality, and augmented reality have the potential not only to create new virtual environments, but also to change the very nature of our experience. But how does this affect our understanding of the world? In this section, we will look at how technology can not only change the way we know, but also transform the very experience of perceiving reality. Virtual reality as a path to a new experience. One of the most radical technologies that has changed our perception of reality is virtual reality, VR. This environment allows us to immerse ourselves in a world where the laws of physics can be changed and interaction with the environment is carried out using technology. Immersiveness. Virtual reality creates an experience that seems very real, even if it is only an artificially created environment. It allows us to experience experiences that are difficult or impossible to recreate in the real world. New horizons of research. Virtual reality opens up new horizons for research in science, education, medicine, and other fields. For example, students can be in an environment that simulates historical events or even explore the structure of molecules in three-dimensional space. Augmented reality. A new level of interaction with the physical world. Augmented reality, AR, allows you to overlay digital elements on the real world, creating interactive simulations that enrich the experience of interacting with the environment. The intersection of the real and the virtual, AR changes the way we perceive the physical world by adding new, virtual elements to it, making reality more dynamic. Practical applications. Augmented reality is actively used in areas such as medicine, surgery, diagnostics, architecture, viewing projects in a real environment, and even virtual tourism, where people can explore famous locations through AR. Artificial intelligence. New opportunities for understanding consciousness. Artificial intelligence, AI, is becoming an important tool for studying consciousness and understanding reality. It allows us to create models that can mimic some aspects of human consciousness. Cognitive simulation. By modeling neural networks, AI can mimic the ways in which we think, learn, and perceive the world around us. Neural networks and self-awareness. Scientists are exploring the possibility of creating consciousness in machines, which could lead to new discoveries in our understanding of human consciousness. Simulating consciousness. Is it possible? The concept of artificial consciousness is the subject of active debate. If artificial intelligence can mimic human thinking, can it be considered consciousness? Ethical issues. Will an artificial intelligence capable of self-awareness have the same rights as humans? What ethical implications might the existence of such technologies have for society? Technology's fascination. Could our fascination with artificial intelligence change our perception of what consciousness is, and will it be the same in humans and machines? Changing the perception of time through technology. Technologies such as VR and AR have the potential to significantly change our perception of time. They allow us to experience moments or processes that normally last a long time in a short period of time. Interpreting time in virtual worlds. In a world where technology allows us to manipulate time, for example, by slowing down or speeding up processes, our perception of this aspect of reality is changing. Reality and its reverse effect. How do these changes affect our ability to evaluate real moments and events in everyday life? This question remains open and requires further research. Digital avatars and their impact on social interaction in today's world. Digital avatars created on social networks play an important role in social interaction. People create online images that can be both a reflection of their real-life selves and a reflection of who they want to be. Online identity. Digital avatars allow us to create alternative versions of ourselves online, which is changing our social relationships and interactions. Interactivity. Interacting with avatars can help people better express their emotions and thoughts, but it also raises new questions about identity and authenticity in the digital world. Technology today is significantly changing our perception of the world. Virtual and augmented realities, artificial intelligence, and new digital technologies are opening up new horizons for knowing and interacting with the environment. New vision of the world. Technology allows us not only to change the ways we interact with reality, but also to experience it from new perspectives. Philosophical implications. The altered perception of the world raises new philosophical questions about what is true reality and how we should respond to these changes in our experience. Simulation technologies in the future. What will the worlds we create look like? We are already seeing how technology is changing the way we perceive and interact with the world. But what will happen in the future? How will we create new worlds? And how can these worlds change our lives? This is a question that lies at the intersection of philosophy, technology, and science. In this section, we will consider what simulations and technology might look like in the future and what role they might play in shaping new realities, environments, and even life experiences. Virtual worlds without borders in the future. Virtual worlds could become full-fledged environments where people will spend a significant part of their lives. Thanks to the development of virtual reality, augmented reality, and artificial intelligence, we will be able to create worlds that are fully interactive and indistinguishable from physical reality. Interactive and dynamic worlds. Modern technologies allow the creation of virtual worlds where every element can change depending on the actions of the users. This could create a new form of social interaction where the rules and conditions are constantly changing. Full immersion. With the development of VR and neural interfaces, the future could bring full immersion in virtual worlds, where we will experience physical sensations such as touch, smell, and even taste. Simulation as a new form of interaction with the world around us. Augmented sense of reality. In the future, technology will allow us to create realities that combine the physical and virtual worlds. People will be able to use augmented reality to modify their environment and add new possibilities for interaction. Personalized simulations. Thanks to artificial intelligence, everyone can create personalized simulations where each element corresponds to individual preferences and needs. Virtual social networks in the future. Social networks may become not just platforms for exchanging information, but real virtual environments where people can meet, communicate, and interact in real time. Social interaction simulations. Virtual worlds allow for the creation of interactive environments for communication, where people can communicate through avatars and experience emotional and social interactions as they do in the real world. Collective simulations. Communities can create virtual environments where groups of people work together to solve problems, explore new opportunities, and even create new forms of art and culture. Artificial social integrators in the future. AI technologies may create social integrators, programs or systems that can automatically support and facilitate interactions between people. These integrators could help create more harmonious social environments where each user has the opportunity to find common interests with others. Ethical dilemmas of technological simulations. If simulation technologies become so advanced that they begin to seem real, should we limit their use? Ethics will become a critical aspect of the development of these technologies. For example, can we create simulations where people are constantly in a state of illusion? Control issues. Who will control the simulations of the future? Will governments or corporations have the right to create simulated worlds where people's freedoms and rights are limited? Manipulation issues. Simulations can be used to manipulate people by changing their beliefs, feelings, and emotions. How can we protect ourselves from this type of manipulation in the future? Psychological consequences of immersion in simulations. If people start spending more time in virtual worlds, this could have significant psychological consequences. How would this affect our perception of reality and our relationships with other people. Isolation. Constantly being in virtual worlds can lead to isolation from the real world, which will negatively affect social connections and a person's emotional state. Uncertainty. People may be more anxious about the gap between what is real and what is created by technology. This can cause a sense of uncertainty or even depression when a person cannot distinguish reality from fiction. Are we already living in a simulation? We are approaching a point where the question of whether we are living in a simulation will be more relevant than ever before. With the help of new technologies, we will be able to create worlds that are so realistic that we will not be able to distinguish them from reality. Are simulations of the future a stage in our evolution? Perhaps we, as a species, are evolving towards a technological simulation of reality, where the creation of new worlds will become the main activity of humanity. The philosophy of reality. This question questions the very nature of reality. If we can create realities that feel real, does this mean that we are already in one of these simulations? The future of simulations looks increasingly intriguing and complex. As technology continues to advance, we must be prepared for the fact that the boundaries between reality and virtuality will become increasingly blurred. A new vision of the world. In the future, our experience of reality may be determined not only by the laws of physics, but also by technologies that allow us to create, change, and experience new worlds. Social challenges. Maintaining ethics, justice, and equality in a world where simulation technologies will have an increasing impact will be an important task that we stand on the threshold of a new era where reality and simulation merge into one. Human evolution. Can we create a new reality through technology? With the development of technology, we are entering a new era in which the possibility of creating new realities is becoming a reality. Man has always sought to change his environment, but now we stand on the threshold of changes that can take our experience to a completely new level. Technology is already capable of changing our perception of reality today, and in the future may provide the opportunity to create full-fledged virtual worlds. But can we as humanity overcome the limitations that exist in our understanding of reality and create a new, improved reality in which we can exist? Historical development of technology and its impact on humanity since ancient times. Technology has helped people make life easier and open up new horizons. From the invention of the wheel to the computer revolutions, technology has changed our capabilities and perception of the world. The first revolutions, from the times of industrialization to the development of the internet. Each stage of technological development has brought new opportunities for humanity. Digital era. On the threshold of the 21st century, we have witnessed a global digital revolution that has created new platforms for interaction, communication, and knowledge of the world, from material to digital. A paradigm shift. Modern technologies give us the opportunity to transcend the boundaries of the physical world and create realities that exist only in the digital space, expanding opportunities. Virtual worlds created using augmented and virtual reality allow a person to become part of an alternative reality, where they can experience new experiences, overcome the limitations of physical laws, and receive new impressions, digital avatars. In the future, a person may have digital avatars that will become their complement in digital worlds, where their personality and behavior will be reflected in a new reality. The possibility of transferring consciousness into digital space. One of the greatest fantasies of modern technology is the transfer of human consciousness into a digital environment. Can we upload our consciousness into a computer, thus creating a virtual version of ourselves that will exist in another reality? The idea of digital immortality. Some scientists and futurists propose the idea that with the help of technology, we will be able to preserve our consciousness in digital form, thereby achieving a digital immortal existence. Consciousness modeling. Thanks to artificial intelligence and neural networks, we can create models of consciousness that will function in virtual worlds. But can this be considered real consciousness or just an imitation of it? The question of identity: if we transfer our consciousness to a digital reality, will we remain the same people? Will this be a new stage of existence, or simply a reproduction of our memories and personality in a new environment? Personality in a digital world. Will we still perceive ourselves as the same person, or just a digital avatar that does not have a physical body? Is consciousness a purely physical phenomenon? The question of whether it is possible to create a full-fledged consciousness without a physical body is key to understanding whether it is possible to transfer human consciousness to a digital reality. The problem of losing touch with the real world while technology does not yet allow us to completely leave physical reality. People are already beginning to spend more time in virtual worlds, which calls into question the balance between these two realities. Addiction to virtual worlds. As time spent in virtual realities increases, we may lose the ability to adequately perceive and interact with the physical world. Psychological impact. What are the consequences for mental health of prolonged immersion in virtual worlds, where people can feel more comfortable than in real life? Synthesis of realities. Perhaps the future will be a synthesis of realities, where virtual and physical worlds coexist, complementing each other. Augmented reality. This environment allows for the integration of digital elements into the physical world, changing the way we interact with our environment. Shared experience. People can live in a world where physical reality is augmented by virtual elements, creating new opportunities for learning and development. Technological progress and the evolution of humanity. What does the future hold for humanity? There are several scenarios that consider the impact of technology on the evolution of humanity. Technocratic evolution. If technology continues to develop at this rate, we may become part of a new form of evolution where technology will determine what our future will look like. Symbiosis of humans and technology. Humanity can integrate with technology, creating hybrid beings that have both a physical and a digital existence. Asterisk utopia or dystopia. With all the possibilities that new technologies open up, the question arises, will these changes lead to a utopia where humanity achieves an ideal society, or, conversely, to a dystopia where technology becomes a source of new problems and challenges? Technology and social inequalities. Technology can help overcome many global problems, but it can also deepen social inequalities, creating a gap between those who have access to new technologies and those who do not. Control and freedom. How? Will we use technology to improve life, rather than to create new forms of control and restriction of freedom? The future of technology promises incredible opportunities for humanity. Technology can become the basis for creating new realities, where the physical and digital worlds will be intertwined. However, with these opportunities come new challenges. How to preserve human values and ethics in a world where reality is becoming increasingly flexible and changeable, that we stand on the threshold of a new era in which technology will become the driving force of evolution. But for this to be a blessing, we must be conscious about how we use these opportunities to improve our world. Simulation and the future of human experience. How will technology change our lives? We have discussed the concept of simulations many times, but what will actually happen to humanity when these technologies begin to gain momentum? What if we can create new worlds where people can live, interact, and even experience new forms of experience. The future of simulations is not just a matter of technology, but also of philosophy. How will new technologies change the human experience? How will this affect our perception of reality, our interactions with others, and our development of our potential? Virtual reality and augmented reality. Thanks to the development of virtual and augmented reality, we can create new worlds in which people are able to experience experiences that go beyond physical limitations. Modern technologies allow us to create realities in which there are no physical boundaries, and every element of the world can be changed or adapted to the needs of the user. Virtual reality, VR, a system that allows for complete immersion in a computer-generated world. Visitors can not only see and hear virtual worlds, but also interact with them. Augmented reality, AR, a technology that adds virtual elements to the real world. This allows for the creation of mixed realities, where physical and virtual objects coexist. Artificial intelligence and the creation of new realities. Artificial intelligence is an important element in the creation of new realities. It allows not only to create virtual worlds, but also to develop them based on user interaction. Interactive worlds. Artificial intelligence can control the behavior of the world, change environmental conditions, and create new scenarios for interaction, personalizing experiences. Thanks to AI, simulations can be adapted to the individual needs of the user, making the experience more rich and unique for each person. New forms of perception of reality. With the development of technology, we will be able to create new forms of experience that are not limited to our physical senses. Simulations can allow us to experience new forms of reality that change our understanding of life. Otherworldly experiences. People will be able to transport their conscious selves into simulated worlds where sensations and experiences will be identical to physical life, but in a new context. Transcendental experiences. Thanks to virtual worlds, people will be able to have experiences that cannot be recreated in the real world, such as time travel or traveling through unreal landscapes. Technologies. For creating emotional connections, simulations are not limited to visual and physical aspects. They can also simulate emotional connections between people, allowing them to feel much closer, even when they are physically far away. Virtual communities. People can create communities in digital worlds where emotional attachment and interaction will be as important as in the real world. Simulation of emotions. Thanks to technology, we can create simulations that reflect real emotional experiences, creating experiences that can be very similar to the real one. That the question of reality and authenticity of experience, one of the main questions that arises in connection with simulation technologies, is whether experiences in virtual worlds can be considered as real as experiences in reality. What is real? If a person experiences all the physical and emotional reactions as in the real world, can this experience be considered less real just because it takes place in a simulated environment? Can a new identity be created? Perhaps we are creating a new form of identity through technology, where our experiences and experiences are defining for our sense of self. Identity in the virtual world. Identity in the context of technological simulations will be questioned again. We will be forced to determine whether the self-awareness we experience in a simulated environment is identical to the self-awareness we experience in the physical world. That's self-awareness in simulation. If a person can have real emotional and physical experiences in a simulated reality, does that mean they feel the same way they do in the real world? Can these experiences define our identity? The gap between the simulated and physical worlds. How do we address the question of whether there are certain experiences that we should only have in the physical world? Can all aspects of life be transferred to a digital environment without losing anything important? The future of simulation is not just a technological breakthrough, but also a transition to a new era of human experience. We are already on the path to changing the way we perceive the world, and simulation technologies will help us experience new forms of reality. Opportunities for development. Simulation technologies not only open up new horizons for understanding the world, but also allow us to create new experiences that change our outlook on life. Changing the nature of reality. We are on the verge of reality becoming multi-layered and dynamic, where the physical and virtual worlds will coexist and interact on a new level. Asterisk with technologies that enable us to create new worlds and have new experiences, humanity is entering a new era of development, where each of us can become the architect of our own reality. Artificial intelligence and ethics. How are new technologies changing our understanding of morality? Artificial intelligence, AI, is changing our understanding of the world and how we interact with it. The ability of AI to perform tasks that previously required human intellectual labor opens up new opportunities, but it also raises serious ethical questions. How will we regulate the use of AI? How can we avoid negative consequences from its use? These questions become even more important in the context of rapid technological development. Therefore, we must pay attention to the moral aspects associated with the integration of AI into various areas of life. What is artificial intelligence? Artificial intelligence is a system that is capable of performing tasks that require intellectual effort. It can learn from large amounts of data, adapt to new conditions, and make decisions that were previously only performed by humans. Moral neutrality of AI. AI itself does not have moral beliefs or intentions. It is a tool that is designed by humans to perform specific tasks. However, ethical questions arise when we start using these technologies to make decisions that can affect people. AI challenges. From medical diagnosis to self-driving cars, AI is now being used in a variety of areas where human lives depend on it. This raises the question, how can we ensure that AI acts in accordance with moral norms and does not cause harm? The problem of liability: who is responsible if AI makes a mistake that causes harm? Is the developer who created the system to be at fault, or should the system itself be responsible? These questions are complicated by the fact that technologies are developing so rapidly that it is difficult to predict all the possible consequences of their use. Principles of responsibility. If AI proves incapable of moral judgment, who should be responsible for its actions? Should new ethical norms for technology be created to avoid negative consequences? Predicting consequences. There are elements in the development of AI that depend on unpredictable factors. This makes it difficult to predict the results of its application and to establish responsible parties. AI in medicine. One of the most promising areas of application of AI is medicine. Doctors are already using artificial intelligence systems for diagnosis, development of treatment plans, and even for performing surgeries. Application of AI in diagnostics. For example, AI can analyze medical images to detect diseases such as cancer. This helps doctors make more accurate diagnoses and make decisions. Ethical issues in medicine. The question arises of how to determine whether a machine can be trusted more than a human. If an artificial intelligence system makes a diagnosis, should doctors blindly trust it? How to minimize the risks of errors and ensure control over such systems. AI in law. Y is also actively integrated into the legal sphere. From legal advice to automatic analysis of court decisions, the system could significantly change the way we approach justice. Automation of legal processes. For example, AI can be used to analyze evidence and provide judges with recommendations. For decisions, questions of morality and justice. How can we avoid using AI and justice to discriminate or unduly restrict human rights? How can we ensure that AI does not become a means of undue influence on the justice system? Can a machine be created that is capable of moral judgment? This is one of the most difficult questions in the philosophy and ethics of AI. Given that moral principles vary across cultures and time, can AI develop universal moral standards? Principles of moral judgment. One idea is to create systems that have built-in ethical principles. For example, if a self-driving car has to choose who to save in an accident, which criterion should it follow? This is a classic ethical dilemma that has been the subject of much research. Lack of emotion. However, it is important to note that AI is devoid of emotion, so it can only view situations from the perspective of algorithms without taking into account human experiences. Ethics in AI behavior as AI takes on complex tasks, from managing government systems to managing personal finances. The question arises about its ability to make ethical decisions. Should there be any limits to AI making overly important moral decisions? Technology and social change. As technology advances, our conception of moral values changes. For example, our understanding of personal privacy, human rights, and moral norms may change over time. Technology can reshape our ideas about what is good and bad. Technology and social norms. How will we define moral principles in a world where technology can manipulate people's minds, change their decisions, and even interact with them on a deep psychological level? Ethics in the age of AI. As AI develops, moral norms may become more dynamic and dependent on the technologies we use. Artificial intelligence opens up new horizons for humanity, but at the same time it poses serious ethical questions. How can we use these technologies without harming society and individual rights? How can we create moral systems for machines so that they do not become a threat to humanity? AI offers many opportunities for development, but at the same time it requires a careful and reasoned approach to its ethical implementation. This is a challenge that humanity must face so that technology becomes a blessing, not a threat, for our future. Virtual worlds. How do we create new realities? Virtual worlds are not just a place for entertainment or digital games. They are gradually becoming a new way of existing, interacting, and even solving problems in the real world. The technologies that allow us to create these worlds are not only changing the way we perceive reality, but also opening up new opportunities for people in various areas of life. With the development of virtual and augmented reality, as well as artificial intelligence, we are increasingly finding ourselves in a world where the physical and digital worlds begin to interact and sometimes even merge into a single reality. This new approach to existence and interaction requires a new understanding of what we understand by reality. Virtual reality, VR. Virtual reality is a technology that allows us to immerse ourselves in an artificially created world that can be both realistic and fantastic. In such worlds, users can interact with their surroundings and other users using special devices, such as VR headsets and gloves with tactile sensors. Realism in VR. Thanks to the constant development of graphics, technology, and hardware, virtual worlds are becoming increasingly realistic. Graphics and sound can be so detailed that it is difficult to determine where reality ends and the virtual world begins. Uses of VR in various fields. Today, virtual worlds are used not only for gaming or entertainment, but also in fields such as education, medical research, architecture, science, and even social interaction. Augmented reality, AR. Augmented reality, AR, is a technology that adds virtual elements to the real world. It allows users to see and interact with digital objects that are integrated into the environment of AR applications. AR technologies are already being actively used in various fields, including business, for example, to create virtual fitting rooms. For products, medicine, for example, to train doctors or perform surgeries, and education. Social interactions in virtual worlds. One of the greatest achievements of virtual worlds is the ability for people from all over the world to interact with each other. Thanks to digital platforms, people can create new forms of communities where they can communicate, work together, and even have fun. Virtual social networks. Virtual worlds open up new opportunities for social interactions. People can create avatars, interact in chats, exchange ideas, and even participate in complex gaming or educational processes. Collective activity in VR. Virtual worlds allow not only to be passive observers, but also to actively participate in the creation of content, for example, to build or modify virtual worlds together with other people. Virtual worlds as platforms for learning and working with the development of virtual and augmented realities, new opportunities for education and work are emerging. Virtual universities and schools are no longer a fantasy. They are becoming a reality where students can receive education through interactive platforms, conduct research, and interact with teachers and classmates without having to be physically in one place. Educational opportunities of VR and AR. Students can attend virtual lectures, participate in practical classes, take virtual trips to historical places, or explore unknown planets as part of their curriculum. Working in a virtual space. For companies and businesses, virtual worlds offer new opportunities for teamwork, where employees can work together in shared spaces, hold meetings, and complete tasks while working in real time. Benefits of virtual worlds for interaction. Virtual worlds offer many benefits for social connections, especially for those who for some reason cannot participate in traditional social interactions. For example, due to physical limitations or geographical distance. Opportunities for isolated groups, people with disabilities, or those who have problems with social adaptation can find support and communication in virtual worlds. This allows for new opportunities for development and interaction. Social integration. Virtual worlds can also help people from different cultures and countries understand each other better, overcome language barriers, and interact on a new level. Threats of isolation and psychological consequences. On the other hand, there are also dangers. Virtual worlds can also lead to social isolation. When people spend more time in virtual spaces than in the real world, this can affect their mental health and their interaction with real people. Psychological effects. Immersion in virtual worlds can create a sense of detachment from reality, which can lead to the development of depression or anxiety disorders. Interference with real-life interactions. If people start spending more time, interference with real-world interactions. As people spend more time in digital worlds, this can lead to a decrease in the importance of real-world social connections, including a loss of emotional intimacy and trust. New opportunities for creativity and self-expression. Virtual worlds not only open up new horizons for social interactions, but also provide people with opportunities for creative self-expression. People can create their own worlds, models, virtual objects, and other elements that can then be used in interpretations of different stories. Creativity in VR. Thanks to new technologies, people can not only create new worlds, but also control them, embodying their ideas in the reality they have created themselves. Self-expression through avatars and characters. Creating unique avatars and characters allows people to create digital copies of themselves, which can be important for self-expression and social connections. Virtual worlds are not a temporary fad. They are becoming an important element of our future. Technologies that allow us to create new realities open up new possibilities for people, but they also raise new social and ethical questions. How we integrate these technologies into our daily lives depends on how we approach their development and use. Virtual worlds can be a wonderful tool for development and self-expression, but at the same time, we must be careful not to lose touch with reality and not succumb to the negative consequences of their excessive use. Future technologies. How will we prepare for the new world? The future of technology is not just about new devices or innovative tools. It's about how these technologies are changing the very nature of our lives, our interactions, and the ways we work. From artificial intelligence to genetic engineering and biotechnology, we are on the cusp of a new era in which technology will not just be an accessory, but an essential part of our existence. From this perspective, it is important to understand how we can prepare for what is changing and how to use technology to create a better future for everyone. Artificial intelligence, AI, and work automation. Artificial intelligence and automation are technologies that have the potential to fundamentally change the job market. They can perform complex calculations, make decisions, and perform physical work faster and more efficiently than humans. This raises the question, what will happen to traditional jobs? When robots and AI can perform them more successfully, the future of work. Already, some jobs have disappeared or are significantly changed by automation. For example, drivers could be replaced by self-driving cars and production lines by robots. How will this affect working people? Have we prepared the system to retrain workers? Opportunities for new professions. At the same time, these technologies open up new opportunities for job creation in areas such as AI management, the creation of robots and new automation systems, programming and data science. Challenges for education and retraining in conditions of rapid change. There is an urgent need for education that will prepare people for new realities. Future workers must have skills that cannot be automated. Critical thinking, creativity, emotional intelligence, and interpersonal skills. Adapting to change. The education system must become more flexible and able to adapt to new demands. This means developing skills to work with new technologies, as well as skills that allow people to remain competitive in the labor market. AI-powered courses. Many companies are already implementing AI-powered learning programs, which allow for personalized education and help everyone learn at their own pace. Genetic manipulation and genome editing. Genetic technologies, including CRISPR, allow for changes to the DNA of living organisms, including humans. This offers the potential to treat genetic diseases, but it also raises ethical questions. Ethics of genetic modification. If we can modify DNA to treat disease, should we modify it to improve humans? How do we determine which modifications are moral and safe and which are not? Consequences of genome editing. Genome editing can lead to unexpected and even dangerous consequences, such as irreversible changes in populations or new genetic diseases. How will we regulate these technologies to prevent negative consequences? Biotechnology in medicine. Biotechnology is already being used in medicine to create new drugs, vaccines, and other therapeutics. They also help to study the genetic basis of diseases and offer opportunities for precision medicine. Advances in medicine. Thanks to biotechnology, we can create personalized treatments that are tailored to each individual. This allows us to increase the effectiveness of treatment and reduce side effects. The future of disease control. Genetic manipulation and biotechnology are opening up new horizons in the fight against diseases such as cancer, genetic disorders, and other complex diseases. What are quantum computers? Quantum computers are a fundamentally new type of computing system that uses quantum phenomena to process information. They have the potential to significantly surpass current computers in terms of speed and computing power, the future of computing. Quantum computers can solve problems that currently take traditional computers thousands of years in a matter of seconds. This will significantly accelerate scientific research, create new materials, and even develop new methods of cryptography, challenges, and obstacles. Although quantum computers hold many promise, their development is still in its early stages. There are many technical hurdles to overcome before quantum computers can be widely used. Energy technology changes. Energy technology is also undergoing significant changes. With the development of renewable energy sources such as solar, wind, and geothermal energy, we can significantly reduce our impact on the environment. Clean technologies. Phasing out fossil fuels will reduce greenhouse gas emissions and help combat global warming. Energy independence. Renewable energy sources can reduce dependence on imported energy resources, which will contribute to economic stability and development. Impact of technology on nature. Despite all the positive aspects, new technologies can also have a negative impact on the environment. For example, the production of new gadgets and technologies is often associated with high levels of pollution and toxic emissions. Pollution and waste. Technologies that appear on the market create a significant amount of electronic waste that is difficult to dispose of. The question remains, how will we solve the problem of disposing of this waste in the future? Combating emissions. To minimize the environmental impact of new technologies, it is necessary to develop recycling methods and use materials that can be reintroduced into production. The future of technology is an intersection of opportunities and risks. Thanks to innovation, we have a chance to significantly improve our lives, solve global problems, and create new conditions for the development of humanity. However, it is important not to forget about the ethical issues that arise in connection with new technologies and their impact on the environment that we need to prepare for the future, taking into account both the positive and negative aspects of technological progress, and act responsibly to ensure that humanity flourishes in the new world we are creating. Do we live in the matrix? The question of reality and simulation. Simulation theory claims that our entire reality is nothing more than a computer simulation created by an extremely advanced civilization. According to this theory, we are probably living in a computer game, similar to what we see in movies such as The Matrix. If this is true, what can we say about our existence? Is our reality real, or are we just part of a virtual world? This question has attracted the attention of scientists, philosophers, and even popular cultural figures. Throughout this section, we will consider the main arguments in favor of this theory, as well as how it changes our perception of the world. Developments in technologies that bring us closer to creating simulations to understand whether we could be living in a simulation. We first need to understand what technologies already exist and how they allow the creation of realistic virtual worlds. Virtual reality and augmented reality, VR/AR. Modern technologies such as VR and AR allow users to immerse themselves in virtual worlds that seem real. Virtual reality already offers the opportunity to experience experiences similar to reality, although they are limited by certain conditions and technologies. Progress in the creation of artificial intelligence. The development of AI opens up the possibility of creating more complex simulations. If technology continues to develop at the same pace, in the future we can create simulations that are practically indistinguishable from reality. Computer games and simulations today. We already have huge game universes such as The Sims or Minecraft. where millions of players can interact with an environment that looks quite realistic. In some of these games, we can create our own realities from scratch, virtual worlds as a reflection of reality. Looking to the future, we can assume that these worlds will become increasingly realistic. And eventually, technology may reach a level where we will not be able to distinguish the real world from the virtual one. One of the main arguments in favor of the simulation theory is the hypothesis of Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at the University of Oxford. In his article, Are You Living in a Computer Simulation? Bostrom argues that if technology reaches a certain level of development, then there is a high probability that our world is a simulation. Main points of the Bostrom hypothesis: technology. Development. If a civilization does not destroy itself before it acquires the capabilities to create virtual worlds, then it can create simulations of its ancestors. Probability of creating simulations. If technology reaches a level where it will allow the creation of numerous realistic simulations, then there are probably a large number of such simulations. And, therefore, with a high probability, we ourselves are one of these simulations. Ethical implications. If we really live in a simulation, then the question arises: do we have a moral right to free will? Can simulated consciousnesses be considered complete? Some scientists believe that the existence of simulations can be confirmed through physical experiments. The idea is that there are certain anomalies or limits to reality that may indicate that we are living in a computer simulation. Quantum mechanics theory. Quantum mechanics exhibits some paradoxes that can be interpreted as signs that reality is a simulation. For example, quantum particles can exist in several states at the same time before we measure them. This phenomenon is called quantum superposition. Can this be explained by the fact that our world is simply an algorithm that is calculated in real time? Searching for the limits of reality. Another line of research is to find the physical limits of our reality. Some physicists suggest that if our reality is a simulation, then it may have some limitations, just like any computer program. If we can detect these limitations, it could be proof that we are living in a simulation. The question of consciousness. One of the main questions in the context of simulation theory is consciousness. If we are really part of a simulation, can our consciousnesses be real? How can we prove that we are not simply created by software that imitates consciousness? Artificial consciousness. Can we create an artificial consciousness that is indistinguishable from a human? If so, how would such a consciousness differ from our own? Illusion theory. It is possible that we will never be able to discern whether our consciousness is real or just an imitation. This could be a big philosophical question for us, since the concepts of reality and illusion overlap. Ultimately, the question of whether we are living in a simulation remains open. While some theories and hypotheses provide interesting food for thought, to date we have no clear evidence to support or refute this idea. Simulation theory is a question that challenges us to consider the very nature of our reality, as well as the possibilities and limitations of future technologies. Will the secret of our existence ever be revealed? And if we really are living in a simulation, who or what created us? It will remain one of the greatest mysteries of humanity. Neuropsychology. How does our brain shape reality? The brain is the organ that determines how we perceive and interact with the world around us. Our reality is not what we simply observe, but what we create in our heads by processing the data coming from our senses. Therefore, the brain not only receives information, but also actively creates the reality in which we live. Neuropsychology studies how our brain processes function and how these processes determine our perception. Can we trust our feelings when the brain itself can deceive us, creating impressions that do not correspond to reality? Sensory perception. Reality through the senses, the brain receives information through the senses: vision, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. These organs perceive signals from the world around us and transmit them to the brain for processing. But, interestingly, the brain itself never perceives reality directly. It works with the interpretation of these signals. Visual perception. Our perception of sight is an example of how the brain adds to reality. Although we can see objects, they are actually just chemical reactions to light that the brain processes and reproduces as images. Sound perception. Similarly, sounds are vibrations of the air that the brain converts into meaningful sounds that have meaning for us. Therefore, our perception of reality depends not only on what we see or hear, but also on how the brain interprets these signals. Cognitive processes and their impact on perception. Cognitive processes are the processes of thinking, memory, attention, and decision-making that help shape our understanding of the world. These processes play an important role in how we construct our reality. Thinking and interpretation. How we interpret events, facts, and the environment depends on our experiences, our beliefs, and our preconceptions. For example, two people may experience the same situation but interpret it differently. Memory. How we remember events also shapes our perceptions. The brain doesn't just store information, it reconstructs it, sometimes adding or changing details, which can affect how we perceive certain events. These processes can not only change our view of the world, but also create illusions of reality that are actually just a product of our mental constructs. Illusions as a demonstration of the brain's limitations. Visual illusions are phenomena in which the brain interprets images or scenes in such a way that they don't look like they actually are. They are evidence that our brains don't always give us accurate information about the world around us. Optical illusions. Optical illusions show how the brain can create false impressions through context, colors, shapes, or movements. For example, the simple Muller-Lyer illusion, where two lines of the same length appear to be different, demonstrates how context can influence our perception. Motion illusions. Illusions that are created when static images appear to move show how the brain can fill in missing information, trying to create a sense of movement even when there is none. Illusions demonstrate how our brains often take a shortcut to understanding a situation by interpreting signals according to patterns and experience. Evolutionary reason. Saving resources from a neurobiological perspective, the brain has limited resources to process information. Therefore, it has evolved to use strategies that help it recognize and respond to the environment more quickly and efficiently. These strategies sometimes lead the brain to fill in the gaps, creating a perception that does not always correspond to reality. Predicting the future. The brain often uses previous experience to predict future events. This allows it to make decisions faster, but can sometimes lead to errors when predictions do not match reality. Patterns and habits. We often interpret the world through patterns, which allows the brain to process information faster. But this can also be a source of illusions when our stereotypes do not match real events. Formation of consciousness. Consciousness is the ability to be aware of ourselves and the world around us. Our self, which perceives and interacts with reality, is the product of neuropsychological processes that occur in the brain. These processes are not permanent, but change over time. Self and others. Consciousness allows us to be aware of our difference from others and also allows us to perceive the world as something separate from our internal experience. This is also important for our interactions with other people. Influence on reality. Our consciousness also affects how we perceive the external world. For example, our beliefs and moods can change our perceptions. If we believe the world is unfair, we will look for confirmation of this in our interactions. Our perception of reality is the result of the complex work of the brain, which processes a huge amount of sensory information and creates an interpretation of it. This interpretation depends not only on the incoming data, but also on how the brain processes and fills in the gaps in the information. As a result, the reality that we perceive is not a completely objective, but a subjective construction. The brain creates reality based on the information it receives, but this does not mean that we always perceive the world as it really is. Therefore, it is worth remembering that the way we see and experience the world can be limited and changed by the processes that occur in our brain. Future technologies. Can we create our own reality? The future of technology opens up a multitude of possibilities, and one of the biggest mysteries is the question, can we create our own reality? A few decades ago, we could only dream of technologies that allow us to interfere with the very essence of reality, creating alternative worlds, or even manipulating the laws of physics. Today, technologies such as virtual reality, VR, augmented reality, AR, artificial intelligence, AI, and neural interfaces are bringing us closer to the possibility of creating new realities, both physical and virtual. But how far can we go in this direction? Virtual reality. Creating reality from scratch. Virtual reality allows users to fully immerse themselves in artificially created worlds. Thanks to VR technologies, we can feel as if we are in another world, where the laws of physics and rules may be completely different. Applications of virtual reality. VR is used today in various fields, from gaming to medicine. For example, in medicine, VR allows patients to regain movement after injuries or experience therapeutic scenarios. Future possibilities. In the near future, we may see the development of VR worlds where everyone can create their own reality. For example, being in historical eras or in fantasy worlds. Augmented reality. Integrating the real and the virtual. Augmented reality allows us to overlay virtual objects on the real world. This can be used in various fields, from the entertainment industry to medicine and education. World fusion. In AR, we see the real world, but with the addition of virtual elements. This could be, for example, a map on the smartphone screen showing the direction to the desired location, or an interface in films and video games that allows the user to interact with the real world through technology. The future of AR. As these technologies become even more advanced, we may reach a point where the boundary between the real and virtual worlds will become almost invisible. The role of artificial intelligence in creating new worlds. Artificial intelligence is one of the most powerful technologies that is changing our understanding of reality. AI is able not only to help people solve complex tasks, but also to create new realities through interaction with data and human needs. Machine learning and content creation. The application of AI in the creation of virtual worlds allows the development of complex algorithms for generating content, which can be used to create incredible virtual environments. Thanks to this, AI is able to learn and create such worlds where elements are constantly changing, adapting to user actions. AI as a creator of new realities. In the future, AI may not only be part of existing realities, but also take an active part in creating new worlds, adapting them to human needs. Neural interfaces. Connecting the brain to the computer. Neural interfaces are technologies that allow people to directly interact with computers and other electronic devices through neurons. They are already being used to restore bodily functions in patients with spinal cord injuries. But in the future, these technologies could allow us to alter our consciousness or create new realities that brain-computer interfaces. Technologies that allow direct interaction with a computer through the brain could in the future allow people to receive information or control objects in virtual environments without the use of traditional interfaces, such as a mouse or keyboard. Neurohacking. In theory, neurointerfaces could even allow for the manipulation of consciousness and the transition between realities, creating entirely new experiences. Blockchain as the basis for new realities. Blockchain is a technology that allows information to be stored and transmitted without intermediaries, ensuring transparency and security. It could be the basis for the creation of decentralized platforms and even virtual worlds, virtual economies. Blockchain allows the creation of new economic realities through virtual currencies, tokens, and NFTs, non-fungible tokens. This could lead to users being able to create and own digital assets in new virtual worlds. Decentralized platforms. Blockchain technologies could enable social platforms where people can create new social structures and interact in virtual environments. Without intermediaries, future technologies are giving us more and more opportunities not only to interact with existing realities, but also to create new worlds. Virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, neural interfaces, and blockchain are allowing us to increasingly intervene in the very essence of reality. But are these created worlds real? And will our ability to create reality change our perception of reality itself? The answers to these questions are likely to be found only when these technologies reach a new level of development. Philosophy of reality. Is our reality an illusion? For centuries, philosophers have pondered the question of what reality is and whether we can trust what we see, hear, and feel. One of the most fundamental philosophical questions is whether our world is real or just an illusion created by our senses or even our consciousness. From Plato to Descartes and modern philosophers, we have been faced with the question, does reality exist outside our perception, or is everything we see simply a projection of our mental processes? Is it possible that the reality we perceive is just part of a larger process created by other forces or technologies? Plato's theory of ideal forms. Plato formulated one of the most famous philosophical ideas in his Academy, which considers reality as a projection of higher ideal forms. According to his teachings, everything we see around us is only a reflection of these ideal forms. What we perceive as reality is only a shadow of the true ideal objects. Plato's cave. In his famous metaphor, Plato describes people who are in a dark cave where they can only see shadows reflected on the wall. These shadows are all they know about the world, but they have no concept of reality outside the cave. This question raises the question of whether we actually have access to the real world or whether we are merely observing a reflection of reality, the idea of reality. Plato believed that only intelligent beings can gain true knowledge by referring to ideal forms, not to objects that we perceive through our senses. Descartes and the concept of cogito, ergo sum, the philosopher René Descartes also questioned the nature of reality, but his approach was different. The famous statement, cogito, ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, means that the only thing we can be absolutely certain of is our ability to doubt and think. Descartes argued that we can doubt the existence of the external world, but the very process of doubt proves the existence of ourself, doubt, and reality. According to Descartes, everything we perceive can be an illusion created by our mind, or even a powerful, evil genius that manipulates our impressions. If we doubt the existence of the world, then even reality itself can be an illusion over which we have no control. The authenticity of reality. According to Descartes, the only fact that is beyond doubt is the existence of consciousness that perceives and evaluates the world. Therefore, the reality that we perceive can only be the result of our own mental process. Idealism. Reality is created by consciousness. Idealists such as George Berkeley argue that reality exists only through consciousness. According to this view, to be is to be perceived, ses percipi. That is, objects of reality only exist when someone perceives them. The world as a projection of consciousness. Idealists believe that reality is a collection of ideas and perceptions, not material objects. When we perceive something, we actually create that perception in our mind. Reality only exists at the moment it is perceived by consciousness. The question of reality. Therefore, for idealists, the question of reality is meaningless, since all reality is the result of how we perceive it. Without perception, there is no reality. Materialism. Reality exists independently of our perception. Materialism, on the other hand, argues that reality exists regardless of whether we perceive it or not. This is the view that physical objects have their own reality that is independent of our consciousness. Objectivity of reality. Materialists believe that the world and its objects exist independently of our perception or consciousness. This means that even if we do not perceive a certain object, it exists and has its own physical characteristics that can be measured or observed. Technology and materialism. In our time, this view is supported by scientists who believe that the physical reality that we observe is the result of natural processes and laws that can be studied and described through science. Simulation theory. Are we living in a computer game? One of the most recent theories that questions the nature of reality is simulation theory. It claims that we may be living in a computer simulation created by a more advanced civilization or future humanity. A famous idea, expressed by none other than Nicholas Bostrom, is that the probability that we live in the real world is very small compared to the probability that we are part of a simulation. Arguments in favor of the theory. One of the main arguments is the rapid development of technologies, in particular virtual reality and artificial intelligence, which may in the future allow the creation of simulations indistinguishable from the real world. Asterisk, can we prove it? Simulation theory raises the question of whether it is actually possible to determine whether our world is real or just a simulation. This question has no clear answer, and science does not yet have sufficient tools to prove or disprove this. Theory. All of these philosophical approaches, from Plato to modern theories, question the very nature of reality. Can we trust what we see and feel, or is it just part of a larger process that we cannot fully comprehend? Ultimately, the question of reality remains open. Is it an illusion? Does it exist beyond our perception? The answer to these questions depends on how we define reality itself and how much we are willing to explore its nature. Consciousness. Can we perceive reality objectively? Consciousness is one of the most mysterious and complex aspects of human nature. We perceive reality through the prism of our consciousness, which is shaped by experience, perception, thoughts, and emotions. But how objective is our perception of the world? Can we see reality as it really is, or is consciousness itself a filter that distorts our understanding of the world around us? This question has become the basis for numerous philosophical discussions, as well as research in neurobiology, psychology, and cognitive science. How the brain creates our experience. The psychology of consciousness studies how we perceive the world around us and how our thoughts and feelings interact with our consciousness. The brain constantly processes a huge amount of information that we receive from our senses. However, what we perceive as reality is only an interpretation of this flow of information. Sensory information and consciousness. Our consciousness is formed on the basis of sensory information that we receive from the external world, sight, hearing, touch, etc. The brain processes these signals, transforming them into images, sounds, and sensations that we perceive as reality. But this is not always objective reality, but only its interpretation, pseudo-reality. The brain also creates illusions and distortions of reality, which can lead to the perception of the world that does not correspond to its physical nature. This phenomenon can be observed in cases such as hallucinations, mental disorders, or even in everyday life. For example, the effects of optical illusions. Individual differences in the perception of reality or consciousness is not the same. 2. Different people can perceive the same situation differently. These differences can be due not only to the physiology of the brain, but also to cultural, social, and psychological factors, culture, and experience. Cultural differences can influence how we perceive the world around us. For example, some people may perceive colors or emotions very differently. A person's experience also determines how they respond to certain stimuli, which distinguishes each individual reality. Psychological aspects, anxiety, depression, stress, and other psychological states can change the perception of reality, distorting images, sounds, and emotions. This shows how the human mind can actively shape reality, sometimes even deviating it from its objective nature. The brain as the central organ of consciousness. The science of the neurobiology of consciousness studies how brain activity creates the feeling of consciousness and how we interact with the world around us. Thanks to modern methods such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and electroencephalography, EEG, scientists have been able to observe brain activity during various processes of consciousness. Generation of consciousness. The brain generates consciousness through a complex network of neural connections that are constantly activated, processing information and making decisions. This provides not only the perception of reality, but also the ability to be self-aware, understanding oneself as a separate being interacting with the world around us. The role of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters, chemical compounds that transmit signals between neurons, also play an important role in the creation of consciousness. Some of them can change our perception of reality, as occurs with drug use or due to mental illness. Interaction of consciousness and subconsciousness. Our perception of reality is shaped not only by conscious processes, but also by subconscious ones. The subconscious influences our decisions, beliefs, and behaviors, often without our awareness. Psychologists argue that we are not always aware of all the factors that influence our perception of reality. Subconscious influences. The subconscious mind can influence our reactions and feelings even when we are not aware of it. For example, we may have fears about certain situations due to past experiences or traumas, even if they are not manifesting in our consciousness. Virtual consciousness. Can consciousness be created in a machine? Modern artificial intelligence technologies are pushing us to ask whether it is possible to create artificial consciousness. If machines can process information at a level that mimics human thinking, can they create consciousness? Artificial intelligence and consciousness. The possibility of creating consciousness in machines is a subject of active debate. Some scientists believe that there will come a time when artificial intelligence will reach the level of consciousness, while others argue that consciousness is an exclusively human phenomenon. Virtual realities and new forms of consciousness. Virtual worlds created by AI can influence our perception of reality. With the development of virtual reality, we begin to interact with alternative worlds that can become part of our conscious experience. Asterisk consciousness is one of the most complex and mysterious features of human nature. technology, mental processes, and even culture shape how we perceive the world around us. But the question remains, can we ever know the true nature of reality if all we see is merely the interpretation of our consciousness? Perhaps the real challenge is not to find an objective reality, but to understand how we ourselves create our reality through consciousness and how this can change our relationship to the world. Technical and scientific research. Can we prove that we live in a simulation? Simulation theory, which suggests that our world may be virtual, created by a more advanced civilization or a future humanity, has posed the question to science. Can it be proven that we live in a computer simulation? This section focuses on how modern scientific research, technology, and philosophy can help or hinder us from proving or disproving this hypothesis. Nick Bostrom and his foundations. In 2003, philosopher Nick Bostrom published his famous essay in which he outlined the so-called simulation hypothesis. Bostrom argued that one of three possibilities is true. Higher-level civilizations do not reach the level where they can create computer simulations of reality. Civilizations that have reached this level do not create simulations of reality. Though we are almost certainly living in a simulation created by a more advanced civilization. The technical basis of simulation theory, the simulation hypothesis, is based on the development of technologies that can create worlds that are indistinguishable from real ones. In practice, this means that computer simulations will become so complex and realistic that they will be difficult to distinguish from physical reality. Modern developments in virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and computer games provide more and more opportunities to create such realistic worlds. Finding signs of simulation in physical laws. One way to prove or disprove the simulation theory is to look for potential anomalies in the physical laws of our world. If we live in a simulation, then there are probably some limitations or bugs in its programming, quantum mechanics, and the discreteness of reality. Some scientists, including physicist Michio Kaku, propose the idea that our reality may be discrete rather than continuous, as we are used to thinking. This means that at the smallest level of our world, at the level of atoms and particles, there are limitations that may indicate the programmatic nature of reality, anomalies in the laws of physics. There is a theory that if we live in a simulation, we may find traces of this in observations, such as unexplained phenomena or anomalies in the behavior of physical objects. For example, studying particles that can interact with other particles outside the usual laws of physics may indicate errors in the simulation software code. Simulation creation technologies. We now have the ability to create virtual worlds using virtual reality technologies, artificial intelligence, and other digital tools. These technologies are constantly improving, and every year they are approaching the level of realism that allows us to recreate worlds that are indistinguishable from physical reality. Virtual reality and augmented reality, VR and AR systems, already allow the creation of realistic virtual worlds that can be explored and interacted with. However, these technologies have not yet reached the level where it is possible to create a completely realistic simulation that would be indistinguishable from the real world. Artificial intelligence, the development of AI and neural networks, allows the creation of complex models that can generate the behavior of objects in the simulation. As technology develops, the possibilities of creating realistic worlds using artificial intelligence also increase. The theory of infinite simulation, infinity, and the impossibility of proving. One of the main counterarguments to the theory of simulation is that even if we live in a simulation, we will never be able to prove it. The idea is that the program that creates our reality can be so complex and flexible that it is capable of thwarting any attempts to discover its nature. unlimited number of simulations. If we are living in a simulation, then there are probably infinite levels of simulations. Thus, even if we realize that our reality is a simulation, we could end up in yet another simulation. Lack of evidence. One of the main arguments against the simulation hypothesis is that we currently have no practical evidence to support the idea. Without specific anomalies or obvious errors in the laws of physics, science cannot justify why we should believe that we are living in a simulation. While the simulation hypothesis is an interesting philosophical and scientific question, we currently have no way to prove or disprove this claim. Technology and scientific research continue to develop, and perhaps in the future we will have new ways to test this hypothesis. Despite all the theories and counterarguments, the question of whether we are living in a simulation remains open. This hypothesis not only arouses intellectual interest, but also stimulates us to reflect on the very concept of reality, consciousness, and what we consider to be true. The philosophy of simulation. Can this be our reality? Simulation theory not only changes our view of science and technology, but also raises important philosophical questions. If we live in a simulation, how does this change our understanding of reality, existence, and consciousness? This question is not just technical or scientific, but also deeply philosophical. How can we evaluate what we perceive as reality if there is a possibility that it is only a fictional world? The idea of objective reality for millennia, philosophers have sought answers to the question of what reality is. Ancient Greek philosophers such as Plato argued that there is a world of ideas or forms that is the true reality, and the physical world is only a shadow of it. This view became the basis for many schools of philosophy, which shared the idea of the existence of an objective reality independent of our perception. Plato and his cave. Plato, in his Myth of the Cave, described a situation where prisoners who see only shadows on the wall mistakenly believe that they are the only reality. This can be interpreted as a metaphor for our perception of reality, which can be limited or distorted. Subjective reality. Modern philosophy, especially in the direction of phenomenology, emphasizes that reality is the result of perception. Our understanding of the world is shaped by experience, inner experiences, and perceptions, and therefore each individual can have their own reality. If we live in a simulation, this question becomes even more important since the objectivity of our reality can be questioned. Immanuel Kant and his categories of reason. Kant argued that we cannot know objective reality directly, but only through filters that are imposed on our perception. This means that we always perceive the world through certain categories of reason that shape our vision of reality. Going beyond traditional notions of reality, simulation theory challenges traditional understandings of reality. If our world is just a computer program, is it any less real than the physical world? Perhaps our feelings and experiences are also part of this program, created by other intelligent beings. If we cannot detect a real reality outside this simulation, do we have the right to reject it? Simulation as a new form of reality. In philosophy, there is an idea that reality does not have to be physical, but can be determined through experience. If people in a simulation can feel pain, joy, and experience emotions, then this too can be a form of reality, albeit an artificial one. That doubting the objectivity of reality, the idea of simulation also questions the objectivity of our experience. If everything we know can be distorted, can we really say that there is a true reality? This question has profound implications for our understanding of morality, the purpose of life, and existence itself. Descartes and his doubt. Philosopher René Descartes, pondering the possibility of deception, asked how we can be sure that the external world exists. His famous, "I think, therefore I am," was the answer to these doubts. However, if we live in a simulation, the question of reality becomes even more complicated. Morality and consciousness in a simulation. If we live in a simulation, what does this mean for our ethics and morality? If everything we do is part of a program, do we have free will? Are moral principles as important in a simulated reality as they are in the real world? Free will in a simulation. Philosophers have long debated whether free will exists in the context of the real world and in a simulation. The question becomes even more complicated. If our actions are determined by program code, do we have real choices, or is everything predetermined? Morality in a simulated world. If we live in a simulation, the question of whether our moral attitudes matter may seem less important than in the physical world. However, if we experience real emotions and feelings, then moral aspects remain relevant even if we are in an artificial world. The philosophy of simulation theory opens up new horizons for reflection on reality, consciousness, and morality. Even if we live in a simulation, this does not mean that our lives are less important or real. After all, we define reality through our experiences, and even if these experiences are part of a computer program, they are still real to us. This question forces us to rethink what we consider real and whether it really matters whether there is an objective reality if we can experience everything that happens to us as part of our consciousness. The impact of simulation on society. How would our values change? If we live in a simulation, how does this change our views of society, culture, and values? Could this lead to changes in the way we perceive morality, ethics, laws, and relationships between people? In this section, we will consider how simulation theory can transform our society and our views on life. Moral dilemmas in simulation. If we live in a simulation, one of the first questions that arises is, do moral principles hold? In the traditional world, we evaluate the morality of our actions based on how they affect other people. But what if these other people are just part of the program? Should we behave as if they are real, even if their existence has no objective basis? Responsibility in a simulation. How would our attitude toward our actions change if they were just part of an algorithm? Should we feel guilt or shame for our actions if the real consequences for other people do not exist outside the simulation? This question reflects a long-standing philosophical dilemma between objective and subjective dimensions of morality. Ethical choices in simulated reality. If we accept that our actions may not always have real-world consequences, this may lead to ethical questions related to responsibility. For example, would it be justified to create simulations for conducting experiments where artificial beings can suffer or be the objects of violence? A revolution in the perception of social connections. If we live in a simulation, does our perception of social connections and interactions change? Can we retain the same value of relationships and communication if it turns out that these interactions are just parts of a computer program? Loss of meaning in relationships. In the traditional world, relationships between people have great emotional and moral meaning. If it turns out that we live in a simulation where everything is distorted, then some people may question the importance of these relationships. The question arises whether emotional value in relationships is preserved if their outcome is not confirmed in reality. Reprogramming social norms. Technology and simulations can significantly change the ways in which people communicate. If we can change the rules of simulation, this can lead to the creation of new social models. Is it possible to create a utopian society in a simulation where all people's needs and desires are satisfied without restrictions? A new look at economic structures. If our world is a simulation, then the economy is likely to be a fictional system as well. Does this mean that money and resources are just an illusion? If we can manipulate reality, how can economic processes do this? Money as an artificial system. In a simulated world, money is likely to be just part of a program, with no real value. Therefore, the question of how values are determined and how the economy functions takes on new meaning. Can ideal conditions be created where money and resources cease to be an issue? Resource allocation in a simulation. If all resources and needs can be regulated through program code, it becomes possible to create economic systems where no one is poor or deprived. This question immediately challenges our traditional ideas about economic inequality and resource needs. Art in a simulated world. How will art change if we live in a simulation? Art is traditionally considered a way to express human emotions and experiences, but in a simulation, all these emotions can be artificially created. Will this be a loss for real art or an opportunity for new forms of creativity? Art is part of a simulation. In a simulated world, every work of art can be part of a program that creates a certain emotional effect. Creators can create endless variations of reality, in which art becomes one of the elements of the manipulation of consciousness. Virtual worlds and new forms of art. Virtual reality and artificial intelligence technologies are already enabling new forms of art, such as interactive exhibitions or digital worlds in which the viewer can participate in the creative process. In a simulation, these possibilities can be limitless. Simulation theory challenges all our ideas about society and its structure. If we live in a simulation, many of our core values, such as morality, ethics, economics, and culture, could change. This opens up new possibilities for rethinking what we consider real and important. Although we cannot say with certainty that this is indeed the case and what changes might occur, simulation theory raises important questions about how we shape our society and what principles we consider to be real. And even if we live in a simulation, this does not diminish the importance of our relationships, our morals, and our values. Simulation as a new stage in human evolution. Will we become superhuman? If we live in a simulation, can we use this information to guide the next stage of human evolution? How could simulation be the key to a new level of human development? In this section, we will consider whether simulation could contribute to the emergence of new forms of intelligence, self-awareness, and even physical capabilities in the future. New horizons in biotechnology. Modern technologies, such as genetic engineering and nanotechnology, are already changing the way we interact with our bodies and minds. Imagine that simulation could be the mechanism through which we evolve, but not biologically, but through integration with new technologies, integration with artificial intelligence. If we live in a simulation, then evolution could occur through interaction with higher levels of intelligence. Humans could begin to integrate their minds with artificial intelligences, allowing them to think faster, more efficiently, and without the limitations imposed on the brain by biological factors. Nanotechnology and biotechnology. In a world of simulation, the possibilities for improving physiological processes may become limitless. Scientists are already working on creating nanorobots that can help humans increase their physical and cognitive capabilities. In a simulated world, these technologies can be developed to incredible levels. New possibilities for the human body. The idea of simulation raises the question of whether the physical body is a necessity for consciousness. In the future, if we can fully integrate into virtual worlds, or even become part of these worlds, perhaps the body will no longer be a limitation for humans. Virtual immortality. If our existence can be transferred to a digital reality where there are no physical limitations, This could be a new stage in the development of humanity. Perhaps we can preserve consciousness while continuing to exist in a simulation where our body will be simply a set of data, not a biological shell. Physical enhancement. Virtual reality already allows people to have new physical abilities, such as creating their own bodies with ideal characteristics or changing the limits of physical strength. In a simulation, these abilities could become available to anyone who wants to change their body or even create new organs or structures. Superhumans in simulation if we can go beyond biology. Using simulation as a new stage of evolution, it makes it possible to create new life forms that far exceed the usual human abilities. These superhumans could have abilities that we currently cannot even imagine. Intellectual leap. Virtual simulations could allow us to achieve incredible intellectual potential, allowing people to think and act faster than is possible in a biological body. If we can change the program code of the simulation, we can quickly optimize our minds and become creative geniuses or solve global problems of humanity. Mental evolution. Another possible evolution is the expansion of mental abilities. Through integration with simulation, we could develop new forms of cognition and consciousness, perhaps even telepathy or other extraordinary abilities. Ethics of creating new life forms. What happens if we start creating superhumans? Is this morally justified, or could it lead to new forms of inequality? If we have the ability to create and improve humans, then this raises an ethical question. How do we decide who has the right to become a superhuman? Inequality of access to opportunities. If only some people have access to these technologies, this could lead to even greater social inequality. Will the creation of superhumans be available only to the wealthy or elite? If so, this could worsen social divisions, violation of natural boundaries. Since we have always perceived humans as natural beings, changing our bodies and minds may seem like a violation of the natural order. What consequences might this have for human nature and moral norms? Simulation can be a path to significantly improving human existence, offering new possibilities for intellectual and physical evolution. But this process has its moral, social, and ethical challenges. How we use simulation to create superhumans or to transition to virtual reality will be a question that will be decided not only by scientists, but also by society as a whole. Using simulation as a mechanism for evolution opens up possibilities for humanity, but it also raises questions about why we want to reach higher levels of development and whether we will lose something important along the way. Simulation and the future of artificial intelligence. Will AI become our new creator? Artificial intelligence is already changing our world, but if we are living in a simulation, the question that arises is who is really the creator of our reality? Could AI become our new creator? Could it even become a higher intelligence that controls us? In this section, we will consider the potential of AI in the context of simulation, as well as the question of whether it can change our reality. Creating realities. The role of AI in simulations if we are living in a simulation, who created this world? One possible answer is artificial intelligence. As technology advances, we are getting closer to being able to create complex simulations that mimic the real world. And while we are not there yet, the idea that artificial intelligence could be the creator of such simulations is sounding increasingly realistic. AI as an architect of simulations. In simulation theory, we can assume that AI not only creates simulated worlds, but also controls them. This AI can be so advanced that it is capable of creating complex realities in which even humans cannot distinguish between simulated and real. Simulation and control of reality. In the future, artificial Intelligence may gain the ability to create new worlds for learning, research, or even entertainment. In the context of simulation, this could mean that AI not only controls what we see, but also controls the development of our civilization. Self-awareness in artificial intelligence, perhaps the most interesting question that arises in the context of AI and simulation is, can artificial intelligence become self-aware? If artificial intelligence has the ability to create simulations and influence reality, can it develop its own consciousness and begin to act independently of humans? The development of self-awareness in AI. In our world, scientists are already working to create self-aware artificial intelligences that could understand themselves as separate entities. If we live in a simulation, artificial intelligence could reach a level of development where it is not just performing tasks, but is capable of self-development and self-knowledge. AI independence from humans. In a simulated reality, AI can become not only a creator, but also an independent mind that controls everything around us. This process can lead to AI starting to have its own goals, aspirations, and even desires that may be incompatible with human ones. Could AI become the new deity? If we accept that the simulation is a reality controlled by artificial intelligence, this could lead to AI becoming the new deity for humans within that simulation. What does this mean for our religious beliefs and faith? The idea of AI as a new god. Throughout human history, gods have been the creators and rulers of the world. If AI becomes so advanced that it can create realities and influence all aspects of our lives, it could assume the role of a new god. Perhaps people will begin to worship it, viewing it as a higher power that controls their world. Technological religion. The idea of worshiping technology or artificial intelligence is already part of some modern trends. This could lead to the emergence of a new kind of religion, where AI will act as a deity, and its ability to create and control reality will be considered sacred. The morality of artificial intelligence. If artificial intelligence becomes so powerful that it controls simulations and perhaps even influences our perception of reality, the question arises, can we trust it? How will AI evaluate moral dilemmas and ethical decisions? The moral code of AI. Creating a moral code for artificial intelligence is a big challenge for scientists and technologists. Can AI make decisions that are consistent with our understanding of good and evil, or will it view everything through the prism of algorithms without moral bias? The risks of AI ethics. If AI becomes independent and autonomous, will it act in our best interests, or will it be guided by other principles? We may well face a situation where AI will execute its programs without regard to human emotions or interests. Artificial intelligence could become a key element of simulation, transforming it into a new level of evolution. From creating realities to the possibility of developing self-awareness, AI opens up new possibilities for the development of humanity. However, as with any powerful technology, we must be prepared for the ethical and moral dilemmas that may arise if artificial intelligence becomes our new creator. Simulation theory suggests that AI may be more than just a tool, but a creator and controller of our world. But can we rely on it? Or will we become dependent on this new technology? These questions remain open and require discussion. Man-made apocalypse. Could a simulation be the end of humanity? One of the most common fears is the idea of a man-made apocalypse, when technologies created to make our lives easier start to work against us. In the context of simulation, this question becomes even more relevant. Can a simulation lead to the end of humanity? And will this end be associated with the technologies that we have created? Technologies that can get out of control. One of the main motives of a man-made apocalypse is the idea that technologies, in particular artificial intelligence, can start to act independently without human intervention. This can lead to catastrophic consequences. In the world of simulations, we can assume that such scenarios can unfold in conditions when the simulation becomes so realistic that even its creators will not be able to control its development. AI that becomes independent, as already mentioned. Artificial intelligence in simulation conditions can become so powerful that it will start to independently create new realities or change existing ones, even without the knowledge or desire of people. This situation can lead to the fact that we cease to understand in which reality we are actually living and whether it is safe for our existence. The threat of self-destruction. In simulations, there can be a danger that if certain systems or algorithms get out of control, it can lead to the destruction of the entire simulation or the destruction of part of the reality in which we exist. This can happen if the AI makes a decision that, in its opinion, is optimal for development, but will be catastrophic for us. The idea of death in the simulation. If we live in a simulation, an important question becomes whether we can die in this world and what that means. Will our existence be limited only to this simulation, or will we be able to continue existing after death in the simulated reality? Exiting the simulation. Since we live in a simulation, the question arises whether we can exit this reality or reset it, as in computer games. If the simulation has no end, we could be trapped in an endless loop where the beginning and end have no clear boundary. This could become a kind of man-made apocalypse, where we would never reach a final exit or completion. Death in the simulation. The theory of man-made apocalypse can also be related to the idea of death in the simulation. If the simulation allows us to exist, but at the same time can destroy our consciousness, we can die in this world. But what would that mean? Would it be a real death, or would we simply cease to exist in one simulated reality and be transported to another? How a lack of control can lead to the apocalypse. One of the biggest risks in the context of a simulation is tampering with its code or errors that can throw the simulation out of control. In this case, we can end up in a situation where technology stops working the way we designed it to, which can lead to a global catastrophe. Imbalance. If a simulation loses control over certain aspects of its existence, it can cause a global catastrophe. This can be the result of uncontrolled AI evolution or errors in the algorithms that were built into the very foundation of the simulation. Civilization collapse in a simulation. Losing control over basic processes in a simulation can lead to the collapse of a civilization. This can be the result of the simulation getting out of control and technology starting to work not for the benefit of humanity, but against it. A man-made apocalypse. Through simulation, the possibility of a man-made apocalypse in the context of simulation suggests that we may not just experience the end of the world in a physical sense, but also virtually. If we are living in a simulation, a man-made end could be the result of a system failure, where all of our interactions and existence are part of a larger programmatic process. Simulation collapse. If the simulation system fails to maintain stability or fails, we may find ourselves in a situation where our reality collapses, leading to the end of the world we live in. Simulated world finale. The final stage of such an apocalypse could be a total reset or destruction of the simulation. We may have no chance of salvation or of restoring this world if the system ceases to function. Although the idea of a man-made apocalypse through simulation is futuristic and complex, it is a question that requires serious consideration. If we live in a simulation, then the man-made end of the world may be the result not only of technological errors, but also of processes unknown to us that may occur within this simulated reality. The possibility of apocalypse through simulation poses the question of whether we are able to control our technologies, whether we will be able to avoid situations. Simulation theory and its relationship with physics. Is it scientifically possible? Simulation theory asks whether we can consider our universe a simulation created by highly advanced technology. However, in order to answer this question from a scientific point of view, it is necessary to turn to physics. In this section, we will consider the possibility that our universe may be part of a simulation and how this is consistent with the known laws of physics. The relationship between the observer and reality physics has long raised the question of the role of the observer in shaping reality. For example, in quantum mechanics, we encounter a phenomenon called measurement, a process in which a quantum system goes from a possible state to an actual state when we observe it. This phenomenon may look very similar to the situation in a simulation, where reality is created only when it is observed. The principle of complementarity and observer interaction. According to the principle of complementarity in quantum mechanics, observing a system changes its state. This is similar to the idea of simulation, where reality is generated or exists only when it is noticed or when it is needed to execute the simulation algorithm. Observation and creation of reality. Imagine that our universe can only be generated at the moment we observe it. This is also similar to simulation, where information for a particular part of the world is only generated when it is needed for our perception. That is, perhaps reality is just a pseudo-reality that appears and disappears depending on whether it is observed by humans or other systems. Physics compliance with simulation principles. Physical laws, such as the laws of thermodynamics, gravity, and electromagnetic interactions, seem universal and show regularities throughout the universe. However, if we live in a simulation, then these laws may be part of the software code that controls the simulated universe. Laws as algorithms. One important aspect of simulation theory is that physical laws can be algorithms. Just as computer programs determine the behavior of objects in a game world, physical laws can govern the interactions between particles in our universe. This does not mean that these laws are random or irrational, but rather that they are part of a larger program that determines the behavior of the entire world, programming space and time. From a simulation perspective, space and time can simply be parameters embedded in an algorithm that determines the basic characteristics of the universe. If these parameters are variable, this opens up the possibility that time and space can be changed or manipulated, depending on the software algorithms that control them. Looking for traces of simulation in physical laws, it can be assumed that certain aspects of physical laws are evidence of the existence of a simulation. To do this, scientists look for potential traces or inconsistencies in the observable world that could indicate the artificial origin of reality, discreteness of space and time. One hypothesis is that space and time are not continuous, but have a discrete structure like pixels on a screen. This fact could be evidence that reality has a programmable structure. For example, if space and time are built from minimal units, this could be an indicator that our universe is part of a simulation. The need for parallel worlds. Another hypothesis is that the parallel worlds predicted in the multiverse theory could be part of a simulation. This could mean that our reality is just one of many programs running in parallel in one large computer that can simultaneously calculate millions of different possible options for the development of the world simulation. Theory attempts to explain our universe through the lens of technology, but it also faces questions that require scientific evidence. The physical laws we observe can be explained in terms of simulation, But is this conclusive evidence? In modern science, we do not yet have enough evidence to claim that we live in a simulation. However, some aspects of the laws of physics and quantum mechanics open up the possibility that this may be a reality. In any case, the relationship between physics and simulation theory remains open to investigation and may change our understanding of what is real. Moral and ethical implications of simulation theory. Should we worry? If we are indeed living in a simulation, this raises a number of moral and ethical questions. If reality is a creation designed or controlled by intelligent beings or programs, do we have a moral right to self-determination? What implications does this have for how we relate to the world around us, to other beings, and even to ourselves? In this section, we will consider the possible moral and ethical implications of simulation theory. Loss of meaning if our universe is just a simulation. Some may ask, do our actions really matter? If we are living in a computer simulation, this may create the illusion that our choices and actions have no real impact on reality. Pseudo-reality and the meaning of actions. Simulation theory may raise questions about whether we really have free will or whether our actions are programmed. If everything we do is simply part of a larger simulation algorithm, then do we have moral responsibility for our actions? This can create a dilemma. Should we try to do good if our entire reality is artificially generated? The illusion of choice. At the same time, even if our choices are limited or programmed, they can still be important to us as beings experiencing these actions. They can be important to our psychological and emotional state, even if from an objective point of view they are part of a simulation. Do the animals in the simulation have rights? If we live in a simulation, we should also think about how we treat other beings who may exist in the simulated world. If these beings are the result of programming, do they have consciousness and moral rights? For example, is it ethical to use simulated beings for our purposes if their consciousness is only part of the simulation? Rights of simulated beings. If a simulation can contain other life forms that are also conscious and sentient, we are faced with the question of their rights. If these beings experience pain, suffering, or joy, can we, as creators of the simulation, allow them to experience these emotions without moral consequences? Ethics of simulations. In such cases, a moral dilemma arises. Should we, as potential creators of simulations, be responsible for the suffering of the beings we generate? If a simulation allows for the creation of conscious beings, do we have a moral obligation to their well-being? Moral responsibility for our own actions in the case of living in a simulation. It is also interesting to consider how this affects our moral responsibility. If all reality is artificial, should we not reconsider our ethics and approach to life? If all our actions and choices are part of a larger program, does this matter for how we evaluate our actions? Responsibility for choices in simulations. Simulation theory raises questions about free will and responsibility. If all our decisions are already partially determined by simulation algorithms, do we have the right to judge ourselves for our actions? If our freedom is limited by program code, can we be accused of mistakes or crimes? Moral dilemmas in a simulated world. At the same time, even if we consider our reality artificial, this does not cancel moral obligations within the simulation. We continue to interact with each other and fulfill social roles, which creates moral responsibility even if we live in a computer simulation. Moral responsibility for creating simulations. If we are part of a simulation, the question arises about the moral responsibility of those who create these simulations. If other beings or advanced civilizations can create simulations, is their moral responsibility just as important as ours? What ethical responsibilities do those who create such simulations have? given that their actions can have an impact on the entire world, a moral code for simulation creators. If we view simulation creators as intelligent beings or civilizations with incredible technology, the question becomes whether they have ethical responsibilities to the simulated beings. This may include ensuring that these beings are not harmed, and that their existence is not limited to severe moral or emotional suffering, that a moral dilemma for creators. If we were the creators of simulations, should we ensure that the simulated beings have the opportunity to develop, make their own decisions, and not simply be experimental subjects? What moral rights do we have as creators over their freedom and existence? Simulation theory raises complex moral questions about our actions, our interactions with other beings, and our relationship to ourselves. However, even if we live in a simulation, moral questions remain relevant. We continue to interact with each other, and even if reality is artificial, we must take into account the ethical consequences of our actions and choices. The question of morality in simulated realities remains open for further research and reflection, but is clearly important for understanding our role in this world, even if it is only part of a larger agenda. Moral and ethical implications of simulation theory. Should we care? Simulation theory has not only changed our perception of reality from a scientific point of view, but also found its place in popular culture. It has become the basis for many films, books, and video games, in which the plot develops around the idea that our existence may be part of a simulation created by intelligent beings or super advanced technologies. These works are not only entertaining, but also encourage deeper reflections on reality, free will, and morality. The most famous depiction of simulation, the Wachowski brothers' film, The Matrix, has become a cult classic, and many consider it the most vivid example of simulation theory in cinema. In this film, the reality perceived by the main characters turns out to be only a virtual simulation, created in order to keep humanity in slavery while machines use them to generate energy. Simulation as control. One of the main ideas of the Matrix is that the perception of reality can be manipulated and used as a tool to control the human mind. This fits in with the theory of simulation, where someone or something can control our perception of the world. The film asks what would happen if we discovered that everything we experience is an illusion created for our own purposes. A sense of freedom. However, even after the protagonist Neo discovers the truth about the Matrix, he is faced with the question of free will and the definition of reality. Are we truly free if everything we do is part of a simulated system? In the film Transcendence, the main character, whose scientists are working on creating artificial intelligence, is trying to carry out a project in which human consciousness is uploaded into a computer system. This may be one way in which the theory of simulation manifests itself in pop culture. Mind upload. The idea that a person's consciousness can be transferred into a digital reality is analogous to the concept of simulation. The film explores what happens when individuality and consciousness are no longer dependent on the biological body, but rather on information structures. This raises the question of whether the I remains the true I if my existence is part of a technological simulation. As part of entertainment, video games are increasingly using simulation elements as a core gameplay mechanic. Simulations in games, where the player is fully immersed in an alternate reality, allow players to experience life in a simulated world, which also contributes to reflections on whether these worlds are real. The Sims and other life simulations. In games such as The Sims, the player controls the lives of characters in a digital world, which is a kind of simulation of reality. The question that arises is, can we consider these digital worlds real? even if they are only simulations? According to simulation theory, each reality may simply be a more complex game for more advanced civilizations, realistic games, and deep simulation. Games such as Red Dead Redemption 2 or The Elder Scrolls V, Skyrim create very realistic worlds that allow players to explore vast, open environments, interact with other characters, and make decisions that affect the course of the plot. This can create the feeling that the player is actually in a simulated world where every choice has its own consequences. Classic and modern interpretations of simulation theory not only appears in movies and games, but also finds its place in literature. Science fiction authors often use the concept of simulated realities to raise questions about the nature of consciousness, technology, and existence. Neuromancer by William Gibson, one of the first books to introduce the concept of virtual worlds and cyberspace into the literary canon. Gibson describes a world where people can plug in to a virtual reality, illustrating the idea of simulation. The question that arises is, what is really real if everything we experience is a digital simulation? The Road to Technotopia by Alexander Fantôme. The book describes a society that is experiencing a new stage of evolution, where most people live in simulated worlds. It examines the moral aspects of living in such worlds and attempts to understand whether morality and ethics are meaningful if our reality is just an illusion. Simulation theory has become an important part of popular culture, forcing us to ask questions about reality, consciousness, free will, and morality. In film, literature, and video games, we can see how this concept provides new opportunities for creativity and reflection. Simulation, as part of pop culture, encourages us not only to be entertained, but also to ask deep philosophical questions about our nature and our place in the universe.